Welcome to the Peripheral Views podcast. We're back with another episode. This is our second for the podcast. This is actually going to be the first, however, in our biography series. We're going to do a lot of these. These are pretty interesting, pretty wide array of options for the biography series. We're looking forward to some of the other ones coming up, and we'll let you know as those arise. But first things first, welcome to the podcast.
Welcome
Erroll, how you
back.
doing?
I am doing pretty well.
We got a
I'm
good one today.
yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this actually. I feel like if other than people that are that have like an intimate knowledge about the boxing community, his story isn't really like well known, and it's a tragic one, and I feel like it's well deserved. It's well worth talking about, well deserved.
Yeah, and who we're talking about today is former heavyweight champion Charles L. Sonny Liston. Um, he is an icon of professional boxing. His era is obviously like one of the most revered and well studied, important eras in boxing history specifically,
And
and
controversial.
for sure controversial, as we'll get into throughout the podcast today. I mean, a very turbulent time in the sport for a lot of reasons, but also, there's an argument to be made that it helped that those controversies in some ways helped put the sport in more of a limelight. We'll get into all the details about that throughout the podcast, but we'll be talking about Sonny Liston today specifically. Um, so a bit of housekeeping to get us rolling here. Same spots as our previous first episode to find us. You're going to find us on Twitter at Peripheral V123. That's the Twitter page for any feedback you want to leave us. We'll be posting the episodes on there, or a link to the episodes, I should say, directly on Twitter. These will be also be able to be downloaded or streamed on SoundCloud, and you can find us on soundcloud.com/peripheral views 123. That's where they're going to be downloaded for the as a temporary means of streaming the podcast. So these episodes will be out on that, and we will update on Twitter as they get released. Further feedback, you can reach us by Gmail, peripheralviewspodcast@gmail.com. That's the place that you can feel free to send emails as much as possible for feedback. Twitter is probably the easiest one, just being that it's, that's where a lot of the feedback is going to come from. But we're open to, we'll be checking the email as well pretty regularly. As I said in the previous podcast, we're going to be working on Spotify. Publication on Apple Podcasts is coming. It's forthcoming. If you're listening to this retroactively, it's probably the platform that you're actually listening to us on. And at this stage, as of today, May 24th, 2023, our website is still under construction, and we'll be working on getting that launched probably within, a handful of weeks, just as we mentioned in the previous episode. So that is the housekeeping for the podcast and the status of where we're at in the development. But going into before we get into the good stuff, the meat and potatoes of today's episode, let's do a little recap on our first episode. I know that Errol and I had a couple of things that we wanted to bounce back to from the first episode. That episode was on the 1982 Stone Cold classic, John Carpenter's The Thing. We had a bunch of fun talking about that episode, or about that film in that episode. Unpacking that movie was a blast. And I actually rewatched it another time after recording the podcast, and there was like obviously a million things to discuss in the film, but even after the recording, I found more things I wanted to talk about. So there's probably some revisitation opportunity on that film later down the line. But Errol, you've there's a couple of things I know you wanted to talk about that episode. Some things you missed, some things that you wanted to revise or revisit. So what were those things?
Yeah, just in general, of course, I felt like we were a little excited, so there are a couple things that I might have skipped over a bit, but that's also one thing that I wanted to address. We definitely kind of dove right into that first episode, and I do imagine in future episodes we're going to probably take like a more like reserved, like a stepping back point of view. It's I think we did really well, but my only hang up was maybe we should have had a like a dotted actual like periodical review of it. You know what I
Agreed.
mean? Like from like
Sure.
this moment, like like the first quarter of the movie, second quarter. But
Yeah, keeping things
I absolutely
chronological.
yes, but I absolutely loved it. I was really excited to talk about it, and that's kind of my problem when I get really excited about stuff, I'll start bouncing, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's a great
Oh, we
episode. Other
both,
than that,
yeah, agree.
but I just wanted to let that be known that we are going to try to really just step back and take like a more like reserved look. But a couple things that I did miss going over, I believe, are some. One of them is like really important because if you didn't know this, the uh, the teams that actively like go to the Arctic and like do that, like the scientists that do that today, they will watch the movie as tradition before going on up and then just isolating themselves from everyone.
Yeah,
They're like, what a
I've read
better
that
movie.
before.
Yeah, they're like, what a better movie to watch before we just hang out with the same 10 people for 3 months than
Yeah,
a movie about in this exact same or the exact same scenario and someone's
right.
just a horrifying alien monster.
Yeah, no, I had actually read something. I had actually read that somewhere along the way in my research for the film, and yeah, I think that's really funny, and because well, it's also funny because it's funny that they still do research like that, but I don't know that that's a tradition that I would want to be a part of. I feel
Oh
like, I
no.
mean, I mean, it gets you prepared, but man, I don't know. Maybe I feel like it could plant a seed of paranoia.
Well, no,
Just
that too, but it's really good because if something like that legit happens, they're like, nope, we told you, Chuck, you don't remember that password, do you? We watch it every year. What's the password? And then they're just like,
that's
no, but the paranoia, you're right. No, that would, no, I'm saying like in an
yeah.
actual, no, in like a legitimate like alien scenario, they'd be like, oh, do the thing, and you have to like, like tug your left earlobe and then like wink, and then if it's
Yeah,
not
no, there's got to be like a Morse code. Like
right,
you have to have
exactly.
something that can differentiate yourself between
If you
if you
hit him with the
were
yep,
imitated.
if you hit him with the move the second it's like or like if you hit him with the some kind of movement the second it happens, you just have to be like, yo, if you don't respond, it's him.
But like the thing was like so good with the imitation that,
Right, you it only
but
works once.
there's got to be something. There's got to be maybe they have like a new technology that they
They
can
just always
introduce.
have everyone needs to be really really okay with needles. They're like blood test no matter what. Everyone
Yeah.
relax, blood test the second it happens.
Well, it's funny. That's like a bit of foreshadowing on the Sonny Liston story right there, the being
Oh
okay with
for
needles
sure.
things. But we'll get to that in the episode. Yeah, no, I agree with the first part of your diatribe there about just trying to stay chronological. This will be a little easier to do because it is a biography, and you can't really tell the story of an individual without staying somewhat chronological. Um, so we're looking to do a little better job of that. I still had fun with the film and talking about the film, even bouncing around the plot a little bit. I feel like if you have seen the film, you could enjoy the podcast. If it's something you haven't seen yet, you're probably not going to get too much out of it.
It's a little
Just
more
be
esoteric if you haven't seen it. Like,
Yeah, it'd be a tough listen if you hadn't seen it. But if you had, you probably had, you probably enjoyed, what we had to say about it and maybe learned a couple of new, little tidbits about the film that could enhance a further, future viewing.
as
So
we
no, I
said,
agree with you there.
yeah, and as we said, it's worth a watch, worth a rewatch, at the very least.
Absolutely.
If we
Yep,
can push
absolutely.
anyone into watching it, great. If we can push anyone into
Fantastic film.
rewatching
I
it,
mean, truly an amazing piece of like the horror film what would you call it, the catalog of horror films across like 40 or 50 years. It's really like at the top of the heap.
yeah, it's definitely cream of the crop. and not like your typical one because if you ask everyone, they all like the Chuckies and the
Yeah, all right.
Jason, your Michael Myers,
Nah,
Freddy Krueger.
the thing is its own thing. But anyway, so we're real happy with that recording. I thought that went really well for especially for a pilot. I was super happy to talk about the film, and if you haven't checked out that episode, feel free to bounce back an episode from this one. It is our pilot episode, so feel free to go back and check that out. Um, I had an additional note I wanted to add going forward with this one. I try to introduce some kind of either podcast or a piece of media that I've been interested in, or that I really want to, push into the limelight a bit. For this episode specifically, though, I want to actually I'm only gonna include this biography that I actually used for this podcast and the research for this podcast. Um, it's called "The Devil and Sonny Liston" by Nick Tosches, I believe is how it's pronounced. Um, and this biography is one of the more thorough, as far as I could tell. It was a very important biography, in terms of in terms of as books go related to the Sonny Liston story. This was one of the ones that came most recommended in my at least research. So I utilized a bunch of the book. We didn't really have time to read an entire biography book front to back before doing the recording, but there was a lot of good chunks of info on his life that I pulled from that book. So that's my big recommend, I will call it. And we'll as we dive in through the episode, you'll realize, or you'll at least hear a lot of the material from that book being referenced. So I feel like that was an interesting inclusion for our little intro here. Um, so what do you think, Errol? Do you want to dive into the should we dive into the story of Sonny Liston or the introduction to Sonny Liston?
Yeah, we could do that, or we could also talk about the some upcoming boxing events, the Hall of Fame introductions.
Right. Oh, of course. Yeah. Let's do that. Let's take a quick minute or two break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about the state of boxing today. Some interesting fights that have happened recently in the last week or two, and then we'll talk
Actually,
about some of the big fights coming up.
you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to take a moment to remember Jim Brown, if we could.
Yeah. That's actually a good time for that. Let's do that before we go to break. The legendary Jim Brown passed away um, on May 18th. My wife's birthday, actually, as a matter of fact, of last week. He was a legend of American football, of course. Who doesn't know Jim Brown? I mean, played for the Cleveland Browns from 1957 to 65. Widely considered a
From
great.
Syracuse.
Yeah, and from
Sorry, played at Syracuse.
right,
Like
played
right
at
out of yeah.
Syracuse University. Um, was a legendary college player for a bunch of different, probably record making reasons. Was a I think most people actually, I'm not the hugest football follower. I know quite a bit about the sport just from a glance, but I think most people widely consider him to be probably one of the greatest fullbacks in the history of the sport.
Um,
And we
I
want
would I
to
would
go
be
ahead.
one of those people, and I would actually argue that. Um,
Mhm.
there are a couple running backs who will have more. Just there are people who have higher stats with like higher yards, more touchdowns, but his yards per carry at 5.2. That's
Wow.
how do you beat something like that?
Right. That's
Um,
yeah. Right.
two times he touched the ball, it's a first down. Give the
Yeah.
guy the ball twice, you got 4 downs. You're walking home.
What's crazy too is like with the sport of football, and I know football is a pretty old sport, just like a lot of sports. But like he's pretty recent for like because you look at a sport like baseball and you see some of these stats that are every sport has like their players, their iconic legendary players that put up stats that will never be
Untouchable
touched.
feats.
Right.
Yeah.
They just managed to do that. And those records they stand the test of time. Um, but his is pretty recent. I mean, as old as the game is, He's still holding records to this day. And we definitely wanted to make sure we paid homage to him specifically, probably more importantly because of his role in the civil rights movement in the 1950s. And specifically related, actually very much related to this podcast. He did um, participated in the Cleveland Summit after Muhammad Ali faced imprisonment for refusing to enter the draft for the Vietnam War. And he founded the Black Economic Union to help promote economic opportunities for minority owned businesses. So he had a big role in, especially as an African American in the 50s and 60s in the world of sports, utilizing his platform to promote civil rights equalization in the United States at that time, which is very important in the progress of that movement.
Yeah, no, if you ask me, the greatest thing any man can do is use whatever means he can to benefit his community, and that Jim Brown in droves.
For sure. Also, side note, he was. This is just an interesting tidbit that's way less important than those things. But he was actually on the broadcast for the very first UFC event. I don't know if you knew that.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, he actually sat at the table and he I don't know if he necessarily called the fights, but I think he was a big supporter of the of MMA at the time. And I think he did have some associations with or
They're like, hey,
affiliations with boxing,
right.
and he was hired as a color commentator for the UFC. And actually, I'm sorry, I'm reading here. He actually did the first six pay-per-view events for the
Oh,
UFC, which
wow.
is pretty amazing.
It does make sense. They're like, hey, Jim Brown, you're used to imposing your will on man. How do you feel about this fight? Oh yeah, he's really just kind of doing what I would do, just
Yeah,
beating him up and not letting him do anything about it. It's
yeah,
like, yeah,
yeah.
what do
I
you
mean,
say? But you're the baddest man on the planet at this moment because the UFC technically doesn't
right.
exist. Like, what do you have to say?
Well, he always kind of hovered around, combat sports, just being, having such a. I think he had a pretty important relationship with Muhammad Ali in the civil rights thing.
Oh
So,
yeah,
there's probably it shouldn't come as a surprise, but it sounds a little bit surprising when you read it off that way. But yeah,
right.
so rest in peace to Jim Brown, an icon of sports, and super important individual for civil rights and for American sports more generally. So on that note, we'll take it's almost a vow of silence or a moment of silence for Jim Brown, and we will take a quick break. When we get back, we'll talk about the state of boxing, what's coming up in that world and in that sport, and then we will post haste. We'll get into the story of Charles L. Sonny Liston. So hang tight. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Let's talk a little bit. Thanks for hanging in there. We're back with the biography of Sonny Liston. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of that episode, and that story of that person and his role in boxing. thought it would be important to talk about a little bit about where we're at in boxing, some specifically about fights and where we're at in and what fights have been booked, what fights have taken place as in the last week or two. Pardon me. So this past weekend there was a couple of big fights. You could call them big fights in the world of boxing. Not necessarily your pay-per-view sellers or anything like that. Not huge, big, Tyson Fury level fights. But so this past weekend, Devin Haney took on Vasily Lomachenko for the undisputed lightweight championship that Devin Haney holds. Um, this kid, Devin Haney, he pulled out the win, but it was pretty controversial. Had this hit your radar, Errol?
Yeah, no, I don't know why it was controversial personally because I didn't watch the fight, but I mean the only way it would be controversial if the judges were you know, I don't know if it was rigged because it was unanimous.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't understand the robbery talk about it. I haven't watched the fight in full. I watched it in fast paced clips, round by round. It definitely looked like Lomachenko. If I were guessing to watch the fight in full, it seems like I probably would have scored it for Lomachenko just on that glance. Loma is like he's obviously a Ukrainian legend, probably a Hall of Famer, first ballot Hall of Famer, and an incredible champion himself. But Devin Haney, yeah, he's this kid's unbelievable. I mean, yeah, get this, kid's now 30-0, right? He's
Jeez.
24.
Oh
24. I mean, his story is pretty wild too. I mean, his dad's his head coach, Bill Haney, and he's got a career. I mean, they just racked up a lot of like pro fights. You know, whatever. It's kind of one of those boxing stories where is it a padded record? Probably. I mean, you can probably say that if you look back at it. I mean, he's still a fighter though. He still fought those pro fights. So, um, but 30-0 and you're 24, I mean, Jesus, we're on a pace here that's going to look a lot like it's a hellacious pace for a guy that age.
yeah. No,
But
that's it's definitely something special. But you see that all the time in boxing almost more than any other sport. Young and upper young and up and comers just people are just hungry. But it's if you ask me, that's why the sport's scary too, you know?
it is.
You're out
That's why
there.
people die in the sport, and
Yeah.
but they make pretty good money. I mean, the guys on the bottom rung definitely struggle a bit, but once they make it, if you're getting into championship fights, and we'll talk a lot about that in the Sonny Liston story today. But no, that fight was it was a good fight, thrilling fight, very technical. A lot of jab work. Lomachenko seemed to be the pushing the pace and applied quite a bit of pressure on Haney throughout the fight, from what I could see. But I hate to judge because like I said, I didn't watch the fight in full, so I don't want to pretend as though I feel like he won. That's what a lot of pundits are saying, but nonetheless, Haney did pull out the victory. We'll see what's next for him. It could be up and comer Shakur Stevenson, which would be a great fight.
You know what they
Nico
say?
Ali Nico Ali Walsh was on the undercard. That's actually the grandson of Muhammad Ali, and he
Oh,
actually suffered his first loss in this contest.
mm.
But he had a lot of promise, so I still would be interested to see where he goes. Just being that he's got it in his blood. I mean,
Oh yeah.
actually, I'm sorry. I should correct the record on that. He did not suffer a loss. This was a draw. So
Ooh, okay.
undefeated still. He is 8-0-1. So I should correct the record on that. Importantly.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say as far as the Haney Lomachenko fight, that's they say you got to beat the champ to be the champ. So
Yeah, I've always hated that though. I feel like I don't know. I feel like with 10-9 must system, you know, you got to win the rounds. That should be the way. If that's what you're gonna like, because you shouldn't. Basically, I've always been of the opinion that like when the champ walks in the ring, as soon as that bell rings, he's no longer the champ. The championship is vacated.
is up for.
It's up
You're
for right.
it's WWE and it's a ladder match, and you got whoever comes down with that belt comes down with it. Whoever
Yeah,
claws it out.
that belt is officially that's the purse at that point. Um, but anyway, so moving on, we'll move on to the next one. The other big fight of the weekend, the past weekend, was Katie Taylor and Chantel Cameron. That was for the Katie Taylor going up in weight, up to she moved up a weight class to junior welterweight, trying to grab that belt from Chantel Cameron. Katie Taylor, if you're unfamiliar, she's an Irish icon in the world of women's boxing. She suffered her first defeat, unfortunately. I mean, she is like a beloved figure in Irish boxing, specifically, pretty much all of women's boxing. She's just probably on top of the game. She's the, and widely considered to be the greatest women's boxer of all time. She did bite off a bit more than she could chew in this one, unfortunately. She took her first professional loss by decision. Unfortunately for her, gold medalist. She's got a lot of championships, a lot of accolades. So it's unfortunate, but I think she'll be all right.
Yeah, no, she went up in weight class. That's dangerous every time. Every
Always.
any kind of combat sport you're doing that. That's why I don't. I feel like people take the term like when people, or not the term, but like when champions are like multi like weight class. That's saying a lot.
It
Like
is.
it's being ready to fight at like any kind of, it's grueling to make weight, but it's a whole nother thing to be like, you know what, whatever advantages that I have at this weight class I don't need. I can lose weight or gain weight. Like that's it's true. I mean, I guess it's kind of like what I mean, when you're the best of the best, there's only one thing to do, and I guess it's move up, so
Well, that's the thing
that's
about it too, is that because the thing about weight classes is that everyone's fighting at the lowest usually. Well, I'll say this is most of the cases, not always, but I guess the majority of the cases, whoever's the champion of a weight class is probably fighting down to the lowest possible weight class that they can successfully weight cut to, right?
mhm.
So if you go up a weight class, that just means that like you're basically just not cutting the weight. And there's advantages obviously from like if you can avoid a weight cut, there's some advantages there, but there's also like when it comes to fight night, this is why they've introduced a lot of rehydration clauses in professional boxing right now, which is it's a little controversial. I get why these clauses are being introduced because they don't want guys fighting 25 pounds sometimes outside of the weight that was contractually agreed upon. But you got to understand, like you get a guy in there who's 25 pounds heavier but managed a good weight cut, like that's dangerous in the sport of boxing. I mean, that's how people die, I think.
Well, I believe Dan Hooker called out Islam Makhachev for doing something similar with
Right, in the
he
lightweight
was
division in the UFC, right?
yeah, with the IV. He's like, oh, it's easy to be the best when you're cheating. Like
I was interested to see. I mean, that story kind of died out after a little while. I was interested to see if there was going to be an investigation. I think there actually was a somewhat of a statement about that, but I didn't see where it went.
I'll tell you what, that's a hard drug test, testing him for saline.
Water.
Yeah,
Right.
they're like,
Yeah.
look at him. I bet he's got electrolytes in him right now.
He's got track marks.
Right.
But anyway, so yeah, that was a tough loss for Katie Taylor. So she'll bounce back though, and I think they're almost guaranteed to do a rematch, which is I believe that was in the contract. So that's something that's coming down the pike at some point. So let's move into some of the upcoming bouts, big fights. Pretty good stretch actually of interesting boxing matches, but we're still waiting to hear what's going to go on with the heavyweight division. Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk, Anthony Joshua, Deontay Wilder. Those four guys got to get matched up in one way or the other. And it's just a matter of where the chips are going to fall on those. So no announcement on that. So everybody's still kind of waiting to see how the chips are going to fall there. But Some bouts that have been announced is Saturday, June 3rd in Detroit, Michigan. Clarissa Shields, who is 13-0 as a pro, is going to take on Hannah Gabriels, who is 22 2-1. And that bout will be for Clarissa Shields' undisputed women's middleweight championship. That's a big important fight for women's boxing and more specifically the middleweight division, which is she's a big fighter. She's not a, and she's also, I believe, also a gold medalist. Great fighter, and I believe she splits her time with MMA. She's doing both, which is interesting because the training is obviously going to be very different, but she's making it happen. I believe she's undefeated in both.
True fighter.
Oh no, okay. I guess she's 1-1 in MMA, but she is 13-0, and she does have multiple gold medals in women's boxing Olympics. So yeah, she's a savage. She's a pretty unbelievable talent. So that fight's coming up June 3rd in Detroit. Saturday, June 10th. This is going down in MSG. This is a big one. I'm really excited for this fight. I will definitely be tuning in for this, especially being at MSG. Teofimo Lopez Jr., 18-1, is going to take on Josh Taylor, who's 19-0. That's going to be for the junior welterweight title. Super excited for that fight. That fight should be quite the it's going to be an event too, because I think Teofimo is from, I believe, he's Puerto Rican descent, but he's from Brooklyn. So like, I mean, they're just going to show out in droves for him in New York.
Oh yeah.
So that'll be great to see, and him up at that weight class. I believe it's 140 at the junior welterweight. Um, Going right into a title fight. I mean, he's had a couple of interesting fights. He lost to Kambosos, came back and got a KO, and then he had a real tough fight against Sandor Martin back in December. But Teo's a super good talent. Interested to see if he can get back on track after that loss to Kambosos. He actually has a win over Lomachenko.
I was gonna say I'm not even that well versed in boxing, but Cambosis, so that's not a that's
No, he's good. Yeah,
that's what I'm like.
he's
That's
very
not
good.
a
Yeah. He's very good, but he couldn't handle Haney. Haney beat him twice, actually. Devin Haney um, beat him. Devin Haney, let's see. I'm sorry. Devin Haney beat him full unanimous decision twice. Neither fight were close, and they're both in Australia in Kambosos' backyard. So that's a big deal. That just shows how good Haney is. But so yeah, Teo's got that fight coming up. That should be an interesting one. And then the two big ones for the summer. I mean, this is just it's exciting. I will say before we dive into the first announcement that actually just was announced the other day. By the other day, I think it was reported by Mike Poppinger at ESPN. Terrence Bud Crawford, and Errol Spence Jr. Have agreed to a deal to fight for the Undisputed Welterweight Championship on July 29th at the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. That fight, my friend, will be iconic. I mean, just iconic. And you're not allowed to root for Errol Spence Jr. because you share first names.
I was gonna say you already know who I'm voting for.
It's not spelled the same. Only one L.
I was like, we don't even share the first name. There's no other reason why I'm choosing Errol Jr.
It's the fight of the it's kind of like I wouldn't call it hardcore's Mayweather Pacquiao, but it's similar to that like level. Especially the weight classes are the same. I think that those two fought at. That should be huge. I heard in a podcast today that it's actually not a signed done deal yet. This fight's been on and off and on and off so much over the last year or so. So let's all hope that fight finally gets delivered in July, and then a week later you got the circus comes to Dallas, I suppose, and you will have Errol, I want to hear your take on this fight. You'll have Jake Paul. Jake Paul is going to take on Nate Diaz. August 5th, 2023, at the American Airlines Center in Dallas, Texas. What do you think of that?
I think I think they're both getting paid no matter what. That's the biggest paycheck. Dude, Nate Diaz might see like a like crazy money from that. Like that stuff that the kind of money that Dana doesn't hand out is all I'm saying.
Oh, for sure. That's why
What
he left. And by the way, um, I mean, Jake Paul, say what you will about his boxing ability. I mean, the dude knows how to promote fights,
dude,
and people buy his fights.
I'm not gonna lie though, if he really knew how to promote fights, they would do a tag team match, the twins versus twins.
I thought the same thing. Well, I don't want a tag team. I mean, I would love a tag team match. That would be hilarious. And
Just a
if you're gonna
boxing
do the
tag
circ,
team match?
if you're gonna do a circus event, these like gimmicky fights with the Jake Paul YouTuber versus like kind of aging veteran MMA fighter, which I mean, it's just the fact that it's a boxing fight is like kind of like almost irrelevant. Just the fact that they're fighting in any capacity is what makes it interesting. If you're gonna do that,
Yeah,
then like why not do the tag team thing? Get Nick Diaz in there against Logan.
right? Or yeah, at least like a even if it's not at the legit same time, just one after the other.
If you matched up, if you had all four of those fighters, if you had those two matchups, I'll say, if you got Jake Paul and Nate Diaz, and you managed to get a contract for Nick Diaz and Logan Paul to fight, who's main event? Who's the main event and who's the co-main event?
Definitely the Jake Paul one, anyways.
Yeah, I think so. I think because I don't know, Nate's probably a bigger star, but Nick's more of a legend, you know.
Right, exactly. And it's mainly the Logan thing. I don't know the exact parasocial dynamic that him and his brother have going on, but I know is that a lot of people he fell out of grace when he went to Japan and he filmed that he went to like the suicide forest and just like, oh my god, he
Yeah,
found a
that
dead
was
body. It's like
yeah,
when
that was pretty
you
bad.
went to the suicide forest, like of course, like so I think he's been kind of just riding this boxing train, riding or hanging out with his brother a little bit. I don't know though. I don't keep up with him, sadly.
Yeah, I think it was. I don't really either. I think that was kind of a long time ago. I think he's probably done some public apologizing for that to some degree. Not that that makes it any better, but you know. Anyways, that stuff's just fun. I'll watch that stuff. Just based on I'll watch it for the spectacle that it is. Um, I didn't want to bring this up, but I think I'm going to just while we're on the topic. There's two more little MMA. I got to get my MMA fix. Just a touch. There's two little things I wanted to interject here related to MMA. Did you hear about the UFC 291 announcement? Has this hit your radar?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, don't look it up because I want to tell you the card. This card was announced. I know we're doing a boxing podcast today, but I really wanted to give a little shine on this because it's got me super excited. So I'm gonna give you the card from just among the fights that have been announced. I'm gonna give you the card fight by fight from the bottom up to the main event. Okay.
Mhm.
So opening the card, the bout order is still hasn't been established quite yet, but this is going to be July 29th, 2023, the Delta Center in Salt Lake City, Utah. UFC 291. So one of the lower, probably going to be on the main card, big fight. Michael Chiesa versus Kevin Holland.
Okay.
Nice, right?
Mhm.
Um, good fight, very good fight. Derek Lewis versus Marcos Rogerio de Lima. You get the Black Beast in there. I mean, I'm always down to watch that dude fight. I don't care what state of his career he's in. I'm always going to watch that dude fight.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I'm right there with you.
uh, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Michelle Pajeda. So that's going to be a striker's delight.
Mhm.
Okay, now I'm gonna get your attention here with this one. Okay, Paulo Costa versus Ikram Aliskerov, which is Aliskerov is he's an up and coming Dagestani savage, and Paulo Costa is
Is Paul
yeah,
Costa.
it's Paulo Costa. I mean his nickname is Eraser, which is I mean excellent, right?
That's the thing, man. Those Dagestan, man, they
I
brew.
know.
the meanest people, not like me, but the baddest people on earth. Like when it comes to
Yeah,
like wrestling and
it's
just
just true. It's
combat
just
sports.
true. Yeah, he's like a four-time world champion in combat sambo.
I
So
was like,
like
don't tell
he's
me. I was gonna say, don't say Sambo. I was like, you're gonna say
nah, he's
Yep,
sambo.
yep,
Well, he's
yep,
from Dagestan. This is what
yep.
they do. This is what
The
they do. So that
Sambo is just too. Have you?
it's too much.
It's so it's so unorthodox because like I've wrestled in high school and I've always like like just like collegiate wrestling. I'm like, oh, like that's pretty nice, and it transitions well into MMA. Sambo
Surely
takes
does.
it takes wrestling and it flips it on its head. It goes to the extremes to where like it's like ankle picks and then just movement of the body. Like it's just no like a what is it, like the have you seen like that Russian like the Russian like arm drag like where you just if you're both crouched over and you grab someone's wrist, you can just stretch it out to the side and just
Oh,
swing it
right,
down,
right,
and
yeah,
you'll just
sure. Yep.
do like a like that's like the kind of stuff like that. They'll just like grab your leg and like yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's
it's
it's
unbelievable
scary.
pressure, and it's what they manipulate. What I always see that like and we won't go too, we don't have to go too deep into this into the weeds of this, but what I always see as a tactic is that like I just feel like there's like a willingness to manipulate the offensive body in ways that like traditional wrestling doesn't offer. Like you watch Habib and like there's so much shoulder like top shoulder like head and neck pressure that they're willing to apply in angles that don't make sense.
Right, because
Um,
it's like they're not worried about getting pinned.
no, and it's very conducive to ground and pound, which is why when people would always comment about Habib being this a very boring fighter. He's just not. He's not a boring fighter. You go back and watch
No,
his fights. I mean, he was punishing. You ever see the fight against what he did to who was it? It was earlier, one of the earlier fights. It could, I don't think it was Barboza. Maybe if he fought Michael Johnson, it might have been Michael Johnson, where he's just raining elbows from this very, and you look at his legs, and he has like, this is what I mean with like the awkward pressure applying positions. Like his hips are just in, his ankles are kicked out, and his knees are straight into you, and he's applying this. It's like weight distribution that is just very hard to deal with for a defensive wrestler in any capacity. And boy, those guys, they're coming on. They're in in a million different ways, and there are a lot of them, and they're taking over the sport, which is pretty
yeah,
interesting to watch. But let's move back. Let's continue up the card a little bit here. So after the Paulo Costa fight, so that's four fights right there that you've got to be somewhat interested in, right? Um,
oh yeah, no, that's a huge card.
already good fight, good card. Now let's get to the goods. Tony Ferguson is back, and he'll be fighting Bobby King Green. That is appropriate matchmaking as far as I can tell, because Tony's he's lost about five in a row. Um, one of them pretty viciously, Michael Chandler. I mean, Michael Chandler all but kicked his head right off of his shoulders. Um, and Bobby Green's a good fighter, but he's not. It's about time that Tony Ferguson started stop fighting people at the top of the division, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say he
Uh,
also lost control of the vehicle while intoxicated, if I'm not mistaken, a couple
oh,
weeks ago.
Did you see the funniest comment? I hate to be besmirch the poor man and his trying time here, but somebody made the comment that he Tony Ferguson El Kukui tried to do the Amani roll in the whip, which
Jesus,
which is just
the
that
Imanari, he
Imanari
Imanari
roll. I'm sorry,
he
I
Imanari
totally
rolled the whip.
he Imanari rolled the whip. I totally botched that. He I thought that was pretty. I
That's
mean
awful.
that's an
You know what?
awful,
So here's the thing. I've always
sad,
been in like Tony
sad.
Ferguson's corner. I've been like, you know what? Like, despite all the nonsense, he's kind of charismatic and stuff. But dude, I might be done after the DUI, man. That might,
Yeah, it's not good. And he had a pretty bad
yeah.
episode with his kid. Like he like kidnapped his own child, which I don't think he can do that. But I think he was under the influence or something, and he got into it was.
So even then, that was before I was willing to look that off. I was like, maybe he's in an episode if it happens again, kind of thing. But you compound that on top of this, then I'm like, you gotta at some point you gotta start
Yeah.
making better decisions all the time.
Yeah, I mean you're in your I think he's almost 40. It's like it's hard to be sympathetic anymore at that stage. I personally think, and I hate to, you know, I know we're prying on this, UFC card quite a bit. So and we'll move off it here momentarily once we finish up. But I do contend that Justin Gaethje single-handedly stole Tony Ferguson's career. Um, I don't think he's ever been the same since that fight. That fight was absolutely brutal. And he caught Gagey a few times in the fight, but I still contend I have not seen Tony Ferguson of old since that fight. It was that brutal. But let's move to the co-main. Okay, let's roll into it. Now you got a good card right there. That's already 5 really good fights. Let's roll into your co-main event of the evening.
I thought
Jan
that was
Bl-
the co-main.
no, it gets better. It gets way better. Okay, the co-main and main are gonna blow your socks off here. Jan Blachowicz at light heavyweight will be taking on Alex Poatan Pereira, who is moving up from middleweight after getting knocked out by Israel Adesanya. He's going up to light heavyweight to fight Jan Blachowicz as his 205 debut. So that fight is fireworks, and
Wow. Yeah,
somebody's going
that's
to sleep.
yeah. No, I. He's braver than me. That's ooh.
He just got knocked out. It's kind of soon.
And then
Too
moving
soon.
up.
Yeah, and moving. Well, listen, he's always going to be a 205er. I mean, he's such a big dude for 185 to begin with. So, but anyways, so that's your co-main. That's a monster fight, and let's wrap this up. Big, big, big main event. Super excited about this. This was announced this week. Um, Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje 2 for the for
Ooh.
the BMF title after Jorge Masvidal retired. Dana White is pulling the old BMF title out for all the bullshit reasons you can imagine. Obviously, promotionally, he needs a belt on the line for that fight. He doesn't really need one. I mean, the fight is amazing on its own. You don't
Yeah,
need that, but he's gonna
but
bring it out.
I can't think of like two other people that are like better suited for it.
Totally deserved.
I love both of those fighters.
Me too. I don't even know who I like. I don't want to see either one of them lose. I hope it ends in a draw.
I hope it ends in a. I hope they just.
Straight up, or they knock each other out like simultaneously.
But no, like before we do dwell on it, who do you have?
Who do I think is going to win?
Yeah.
I thought about the fight today because it's my most anticipated fight of the year, and like this is what combat sports is about. Like this is the kind of fight that fans love. This is the kind of fight I love. It's funny because like their fight styles are just so reckless. Not reckless. I mean, it's not total recklessness. It's just that they're so striking heavy, and they really just they're the two of the fighters that I would think of if you asked me like what two guys are true brawlers. And it's so
Right.
apropos that we're talking about Sonny Liston today, because Sonny Liston was this of that era, just an absolute brawler. Throw caution to the wind, chin down, bite down on the gum shield, and just bang, throw. And these guys do that every fight. It's just every fight is exciting and fun, and they're looking to get you out of there. They're not looking to hear the final bell, and usually they don't. Um, so I think that's just going to be a lot of fun. And who I have, I had a I had a vision today, and when I was thinking about the fight, and I got a feeling, and it makes me sad to say this, but I've got a feeling I think Justin Gaethje's gonna finally. I think Dustin Poirier has taken one too many wars, and I think this is eventually he's just due. I hate to say that because I love the guy. He's a really likable,
That's the
person.
sport, though.
I know, but he's
You
just
can
so
only get
due.
so lucky.
I mean, McGregor knocked him out at 145 years ago. I think Michael Johnson knocked him out too. But I think that might have even that was I think his lightweight, his 155 debut. I just got a weird feeling that Gaethje's gonna catch him because Gaethje's really just like polished this game up, and I don't know. I just part of me thinks that Poirier's going in for a brawl and he's getting up for a war, like he's ready to have a war. And I think Gaethje's got different plans. I think Gaethje's going to be more conservative than Poirier thinks, and I think he's gonna try to slick fight him and try to catch him with something in off a clinch break or something like that. That's kind of what I'm envisioning. So hold me to it. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Great fight though.
No, I definitely I see exactly where you're coming from. I really want Dustin to not like really want him to win, but I have a soft spot for the old Cajun. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I could see why that is. And he's just a likable person. Really good dude. A
they
lot of
both are.
foundation
They
work.
both are great. They're
Yeah,
really
they are.
yeah.
I mean, I got to be honest. I'm not like a huge fan of like the of Gagey hanging out with like Ramzan Kadyrov and shit. Like that's not cool. Or at least his son. I don't know if he's actually hung out with Kadyrov as like a um, on a personal level, but he's definitely at least been photographed with his son, which I don't know. I feel a little weird about that personally.
Unfamiliar.
Yeah, you're unfamiliar.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Ramzan Kadyrov is like the dictator of Chechnya, and he's like a pretty horrible person. He's been accused of like purging gays and like committing some pretty horrific war crimes. And some of these UFC fighters go over there. He's like a big UFC guy, and
Um.
fighters go over there and they collect it's assumed that they collect a pretty good paycheck to go over and you know you know whatever powwow. And I just think that's a little unethical, but I don't hold it against him. Dude's just trying to get paid. So
Yeah, that's he definitely got paid for that picture.
yeah, oh for sure. But anyway, we don't have to go into the international politics of that. But one more big thing I want to get to. We'll try to coast through it pretty quick before we get into the story of Charles L. Sonny Liston. Um, Two things. Number one, the 2023 International Hall of Fame induction will be held June 8th through June 11th that weekend. Right here in Canastota, New York. I didn't know if you knew this, Errol, but the Boxing Hall of Fame is right here in my backyard,
Oh yeah.
just outside Syracuse, New York. So that induction will be going down that weekend. And the fighters that will be inducted are Timothy Bradley Jr., who ended his career with a 33-2-1-1 record. So he had a draw and a no contest. Unlucky fellow there. Carl Frock, I believe that's how Froke. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. I'm unfamiliar with the fighter, unfortunately. He's 33-1 he retired with a pretty good record at 33-1. He'll be inducted that weekend. Rafael Marquez, 41-9. Hell of a fighter. I was looking at his resume. I mean, and I actually saw some highlights from his career. I mean, he was a vicious puncher. Great fighter, and by all accounts, a very good career. On the women's side, Alicia Ashley will be inducted with a record of 24-12-1, and Laura Serrano will also be inducted 17-4-2. All appear to have really great careers. Should be a moment in the sun for them. So big congratulations to those fighters on their Hall of Fame induction. And I had one more tidbit I just wanted to touch on. I probably should have tied this into the UFC thing, but I did want to talk about the Francis Ngannou deal. I don't know if that
Oh
hit your
yeah.
radar. He signed a deal with the PFL. I believe that was last week. Is a big deal in the world of combat sports. Obviously, it's a UFC MMA mostly story. However, there is a component to it that does touch the boxing world because, from my understanding, his deal does allow for him to take a boxing fight. And I think his plans are to take a boxing fight in the next 12 months or so before re-entering the world of MMA with the PFL. So I thought that was a big deal. What did you think about it?
Yeah, no, that actually the reason it popped in on my radar was I saw the tweet between him and John Bones Jones where he was like, "Oh, you're saying you're the baddest person on the other side of the street," and then Francis Ngannou was like, "Cross the road."
That was good. That was
It's like,
nice.
oh snap!
God damn, can you imagine that fight? Can you imagine what that fight would look like? I mean, who
Oh
knows?
yeah, I don't see. I John Jones. I don't. He's. I like his chances against a lot of people. But if there was going to be one person where I can just see that not going his way, it'd probably be the dude who technically has the strongest punch on Earth right now, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's like he's just got that great equalizer, and Jones has a legendary chin. How that fight would look, I don't know. I personally, Jones and Ngannou is number one of all the fights I want to see Francis fight. Obviously that would be in the MMA world, but I actually am really. I was thinking about it the other day. I would be so interested, and this will pull us back into boxing a little bit. I would be really, really intrigued to see what it would look like if he got matched up with Deontay Wilder in the boxing ring. I think that fight is more competitive than people probably would give it credit. I would still favor Deontay Wilder. He's got 50 pro fights. He's been boxing for much longer. But there's a lot of flaws in the Deontay Wilder boxing technique, or the technical aspects of his game have not been they're developed, of course, but like as far as heavyweight boxing goes, I mean, you saw this in the Tyson Fury fight. I mean, he doesn't have to be the more technical fighter because he has such incredible power, and he a Sonny Liston type of fighter, really, like
like a
truly kind of our era's Sonny Liston in a lot of ways. Thankfully, not as troubled outside of the ring, thankfully, but truly I mean, those two both would bring to the table. I think Francis, as far as the top boxers go, I don't want to see him in there against Tyson Fury. I think Tyson Fury picks him apart and dances around him for 12 rounds, and I don't see that going very well. But I'd love to see the Wilder fight. I think that would be, if of all the fights that I think Francis should be focused on, I think that's the boxing fight I'd like to see. And we'll see where the MMA side goes. So yeah, it could sell. You're right. Absolutely, it could sell. So that is it for our intro. We caught you guys up a little bit, probably more than we should have, but the state. Yeah, you know what? The state of boxing and combat sports in general is really thriving right now in a lot of ways. There's a lot to look forward to. And it's exciting time for combat sports. So we wanted to, kind of give a little update. It kind of keeps things topical for the podcast. And there were some really big announcements in the last couple of weeks, especially the Spence Crawford fight getting announced is at least announced that it's agreed to. I don't think the contracts have been signed yet, but let's pray to God that fight gets across the finish line in terms of all the contractual obligations. Let's get him on at least in the right direction of a big time fight for the summer. But that's the state of boxing as of right now. So what do you say, Errol? Let's take a quick we'll take a quick break. And when we return, we're going to talk about an individual that boy, his story is not for the faint of heart, and Errol and I are going to dive into that. We'll start off with the early years to kick things off, but we're going to begin the story of Charles L. Sonny Liston when we get back after this break. Okay, thanks for bearing with us again. We're back from the break. We're going to dive into the story of Charles L. Sonny Liston. What a story it was to do a bunch of research on. It was really it's an enthralling story. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of ups, a lot of downs. Unfortunately, probably mostly downs for a good majority of it, but an important person to talk about, especially in the world of combat sports, in the world of boxing more specifically. He was he fought in the most probably the most important era of heavyweight boxing for sure, and maybe in boxing in general. So we're going to dive into the early years of Sonny Liston and where he came from. So diving in, there was a little bit of controversy up front in terms of his birth year is actually a bit of it's a bit unknown exactly. They have a general idea, but unfortunately for poor Black families in the Depression era, it was not required to have birth records when he was first born, and especially in Arkansas. And you're talking about the Midwest during the Depression era. So unfortunately, he doesn't have an actual birthday, but he was born into a sharecropper's family. They grew, I believe they grew corn and wheat and a few other grains. Um, very, very, very poor, very, very, very poor upbringing. And in Arkansas, he was one of I believe in total between his father and his mother, and they didn't have all of these children together, but he was actually one of 25 children,
Like
which
24 of 25, if I'm not mistaken.
he was the 24th. Yes, you're right. Yep, I believe that's
Yeah.
correct. So he was so you can imagine that even a family who was thriving financially or in agriculture, they would even struggle to feed that
Well,
many mouths.
so the sad part of it is we're dealing with a sharecropping family 2 generations after slavery. So it's it's very important to note that this it's not going to be a pleasant upbringing. Um, the way he was raised was likely how his father was raised, which was in slavery. It's almost the only thing you know. He was him, and I imagine his all of his siblings were severely abused and like used as almost as like slaves would be used because that's how it was. You needed someone to till the land. I mean, maybe not as like not as absolutely vile as like owning a person, but I mean, when you're on a farm in the middle of nowhere, I mean, it's he was abused, he was whipped. That is
Yeah,
a fact about his
factual.
life, and uh, I believe yeah they it's estimated he was born somewhere around like the 1930s.
Yeah, it looks like it was possibly May 8th is the date. His mother had been quoted as she actually I believe that she had mentioned somewhere along the way publicly that she thought he was born in 1927, or she had said that with confidence, but that it still had never been confirmed because birth records were not actually mandated in the state of Arkansas until 1965, and
right.
especially for a poor Black family in the U.S. at that time.
The US could care less about the actual
Yeah, of
like
course, of course.
statistics of yeah.
Yeah, a horrible time, especially in Arkansas, which was already a poor state to begin with, Depression era. But no, you're absolutely right about the conditions. He was quoted as saying, "I had nothing when I was a kid, but a lot of brothers and sisters, a helpless mother, and a father who didn't care about any of us. We grew up with few clothes, no shoes, little to eat. My father worked me and whooped me hard. He started to work early. His father's opinion was, quote, if he can sit at the table, he can work, which is horrible. Just a horrible,
You
horrible.
can sit up?
Yeah,
Wow.
meaning that
3.
child being able to sit at the earlier than three. My
Yeah,
daughters
like
are.
2. Well, yeah, I
I'm
mean,
sure they weren't doing true labor at two, but as
no,
soon
but
as they were able physically to contribute, he was guaranteed to force them
the
to.
second
And
you're able to pull yourself up to that table,
yeah, I
you're
mean,
old
just a
enough to
horrible
contribute
thing.
to it.
And I hate to, I don't want to split hairs, but I actually think that that was probably the condition of most poor families in an agricultural setting like that, not
Oh
just
yeah.
black families. While I'm sure there are other racial struggles going on pretty much on the daily for a black family in Arkansas, I actually think that that was pretty commonplace for any family, especially Depression era
Oh
United
yeah,
States,
grinding. Yeah,
in the
scraping right
breadbasket.
by.
I mean, it's an amazing, period of time, and I don't mean in a good way, but so that's the start of his life. Not off to not dealt a very advantageous hand for sure. The abuse would continue from his father. It was a pretty horrible experience. He let's dive a little bit into some of the harder stuff to hear. His father inflicted whippings that were so severe on Sonny that the scars were still visible decades later. Quote, the only thing my old man ever gave me was a beating, Sonny said. In 1946, Helen Baskin, along with some of her children, moved to St. Louis to seek factory work. Sonny, aged 13, according to his later reckonings, remained in Arkansas with his father. But right there, it tells you, his mother's in over her head,
Yeah.
obviously, to leave because the abuse is going on, and she's just getting out of Dodge. And
Well, also, what do you do as a single black woman trying to leave abuse with 25
you
kids?
can't get them all, and she can't feed all of them. There's no way to get out of that
Absolutely
situation. I mean,
implausible.
horrible, right? Horrible, horrible, horrible. Um,
I
so
heard
she
I
she
heard
does get out though, which is a good part of the story that she got out of that situation. And eventually so did he. So going forward, he finally does leave for St. Louis to meet his mother, and by all accounts, it seems like his mother continued to be in over her head, having to raise all these children. I didn't find anything about how many of the children went with her, but she is in St. Louis, and things start to turn south for Sonny Liston when he gets to St. Louis.
I heard the breaking point for him wanting to leave when he was, oh, I think it was around like 13 years old or so. Um, he was working on the farm, and then as he always did, and the mule died. And then so he goes to his father and he goes, the mule died. And he goes, you're the mule now. Like, so get to work. Like, what are you waiting for? And at that moment, I think he probably realized that there was absolutely nothing that was going to be beneficial at that relationship that he was having. And yeah, I think I heard somewhere that he went to St. Louis and he tried to go to school
Yeah,
like
and I don't think I think he
momentarily.
started. I think he started in school, and he stopped going. I think that
Even
it eventually
he
stopped going.
you got to think this is a person who was raised working since they were able to move. He
Yeah.
was he was a hulking individual almost his whole life. It's something a it's a here's one thing I would like to emphasize about Sonny Liston. This man was he didn't grow up in like a boxing school or anything like that. He was just conditioned by a hard life. It's something that you cannot teach. It's something that happens. It's a diamond under pressure. This is a
Yeah.
man who was whipped his whole childhood. You get your high tolerance to pain, and just once the mule died, his dad said, "You're the mule now." He was used as farm equipment. He is a he was you end up being a very strong person if that happens. I'll tell you what, I've lived a pretty like candied life. I maybe helped lift a couple bales of hay or whatnot, but I didn't do that my whole entire childhood. you're looking at the strongest kid that like probably shouldn't exist at that point. Like, and
Right.
when you're that brolic walking around in, St. Louis, you're gonna get a lot of weird looks. They thought he was like a grown man. They're like, what are you doing here?
Right.
He couldn't handle.
You hear stories about how like Mike Tyson was like 220 pounds in like the eighth grade or something ridiculous like that.
Ooh,
And you got
that's
to
terrifying.
right, you got to
Oh my
imagine that Sonny
god.
Liston both fought in the same division. I don't think he was quite that big, but he was two, I believe I read that he was somewhere around 200 pounds at the age of like 15. Like he was no kid was huge.
Grown man.
Yeah, basically the size of a grown man. So
With all the
okay,
hardships
so
of a grown man, tenfold.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and that's all inflicted upon him by intergenerational trauma from his father, and probably you could trace it back all the way to his enslaved ancestors. I mean, it's just one generation of abuse
Great great
from
grandpa.
slaveholders. Yeah, I mean, slaveholders inflicted horrors onto the ancestors of his family, and down the line it went. And it's a tragic start to his life, and it didn't get much better from there. So let's move into the next chapter here of his upbringing. So he had no education or any other skills. So he kind of started to begin in a life of crime. I mean, the run-ins with the police were pretty frequent. Um, he did eventually unfortunately join a gang of sorts, and he committed a robbery. I believe it was somewhere around 1950. He committed a robbery with this gang, maybe a little bit before 1950, 1948, 1949, somewhere in there. He committed a robbery, and because he's not a street kid. He's a farmer. Like he's a farmer. I mean, at this point. Okay, I'm sorry. It looks like it's yeah, around 1950. He commits a robbery and he's wearing a bright yellow shirt. So like once again, not a street smart kid. He's lived his life on the farm doing manual labor. And he gets pegged as the yellow shirted bandit. And he and the police are now on his trail. I think he and his buddies were at a barbecue, and the cops finally got their attention focused on him, and he ends up getting arrested for this robbery. Um, and he did wind up going to prison in 1950 for larceny and first degree robbery. These crimes led to several 5-year sentences, but Sonny was released on parole in 1952. But you know, there is a silver lining to his time in prison, because this is when the boxing career truly started.
Yeah,
Um,
that's where he was able to finally have an outlet, something that more like matched his speed. Because I mean, when you start off and like imagine that you have no schooling. You're like, what can I do for a job? I have no education. And then like you look over on the street corner. You're like, how are these guys getting stuff? And they're like, oh, turns out they are being seedy, and
by
I
force.
am. Yeah, I'm also the baddest guy my age. So let me see what I can do. And
Mhm.
for apparently a couple years, there was just a neighborhood terrified of a dude walking around in the yellow shirt, like, yo,
Yeah.
yellow shirt, stuff your chain. He's covered by.
He's like Devo.
Right, like legit. They're like, yo, it's yellow shirt, chill. He's running.
Yeah, so he's like oh, he had it. Yeah, I mean, he had that Devo vibe. He had that
That's
Devo
what
vibe
he's.
for
Oh
sure.
my god, almost exactly. Like if you just
Yeah,
see him
truly.
a hulking individual,
Mhm.
freakishly long arms, which would come to serve
Huge
him very
hands
well.
too, bear mitts on him, like big bear mitts, very
So
very
that's one
large
controversy
hands.
to his reach, because you measure fingertip to fingertip. So people say because of his freakishly huge hands that it's not necessarily, but like you're dealing with a giant man. Like
Bro,
you're dealing with a big guy.
he had a John Jones reach. He had an 84-inch reach, and he was 3 inches shorter than Jones. And Jones has like a historic. I know it's a different sport, but like that's insane. He was 6'1", and
Yeah,
his
no,
reach is 84
there's people saying
inches.
it's all fingertip.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, his hands were abnormally large. If you see photos, if you go and look through photos of Sonny Liston, there's a few of him next to one of his trainers, standing, and they've got their hands. They're like the same height, and their hands are side by side. And Sonny's hands, it might be triple the size of one of his trainer's hands. I mean, just enormous, enormous,
I've
it's
never seen a
built for
hand.
boxing.
I've never seen a hand like bulge out of a boxing glove like in a picture before, like a picture of if you just look up Sonny Liston, he's just holding those boxing gloves and you see his hands through those. Like that provide the padding is providing no support at that time, not for that
Right.
man.
Nope. Yeah, I mean
He's
that's
filling
part
out that glove.
right, and this is where the legend starts to begin. While he's in prison, he's cleaning up in this prison, which is the Missouri State Penitentiary. He's been sentenced to 5 years in prison. He started his prison time, on June 1st, 1950, and he according to research, Liston never complained about prison, and you hear him say because he was guaranteed 3 meals every day. You read that and you think immediately the upbringing was that bad,
And
clearly
then
that bad,
in
clearly hungry a lot.
so the upbringing's that bad and he is that bad to where this is the time of his life.
Yeah, he's getting fed
He's like
every day.
three meals. He's like, this is never complained about prison. Okay,
Mhm. Plus,
just
he
for
has an
that, dude.
outlet. I always think that when I hear that, I think to myself, well, he finally has this like athletic outlet, and it's an aggressive one. So it's like this, a place for him to displace some of his aggression that he clearly. I mean, if there's ever an individual walking around with psychological trauma to deal with, it's going to be Sonny. It's going to be anyone who has lived a life similar to Sonny Liston at that time, and
He
at that
did it to
age.
he did it to such effect that people were afraid to fight him. The people would go two or three people at a time in those in the prison boxing matches.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
What
that's
kind of
insane.
that's what I'm trying to. I'm at that point you're dealing with a with physically a different person that it borderline superhuman. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like
Yeah.
when you're looking like I'm not gonna fight him by myself. You're like, all right, if me, Ricky, and Don can go, we might have a fight. And
Yeah.
then just losing, just
Well, they
still
had a
one
league
person
in
gets
the
hit.
they had a league in the state penitentiary, and he cleaned up in that league. I mean, he made work of basically any inmates that dared actually challenge him, in this new trade of his. Reverend Alloy Stevens, was actually the man that introduced boxing to him. And Stevens was kind of a mentor, to Sonny throughout his time in prison specifically, and actually as he was kind of developing this boxing skill in prison, the Reverend Stevens actually tried to help get him released, get him granted early release, from prison, to for the sake of trying to get him into competition. Um, and I don't think it didn't work initially, but eventually he was granted an early release eventually. Um, but the story goes that he brought in an actual pro boxer, Thurman Wilson, to brought him in to fight. So they brought, he's fighting other, inmates at this point, which are,
Mhm.
none of them are professional boxers, or at least if they're professional, then maybe they're amateur, maybe they have a professional fight, if, potentially, but probably not. Probably most of them are just boxing, to pass the time. And so they bring in Thurman Wilson, who is an actual pro heavyweight, and he comes in and after 2 rounds and an absolute beating that Liston put on him, he was quoted as saying, "You better get me out of this ring. This man's gonna kill me."
Oh my
He's a
in a in a
pro
in a fight,
in a fight,
like you're
right?
in a boxing match, you're like, coach, I
I'm
he's
done.
not fighting me, man.
He's trying to kill me.
He's trying to murder me with body shot. Like he's I'm not gonna wake up.
Well, you got to imagine that's kind of how things probably, he's probably getting a lot of his frustrations and his anger and his trauma is all coming. It's all pouring out of him at this point.
You can't
Um,
hurt him. There's no way you can hurt him more than his father did as a
right. Yeah.
child. As a
Well, he
child.
had it was an important note. It was just upon photographic evidence and as his kind of backstory unfolded, you actually could visibly see the scarring from his father's whippings. Like um, they were on his skin, and obviously, a boxer is his skin is exposed every time he's out there fighting, and those scars were visible. And it's tough to tell in the grainy footage from the 1950s boxing, filming that it's very difficult to actually make out the scarring, but you can somewhat see. And you can obviously read about it, and that photographers, specifically when we get to the Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali fights, there's plenty of footage of those fights, and you can actually make some of that stuff out a little bit better. But circling back, and I just want to ensure we stay on a chronological order here. So while he's in prison, he does eventually get a release, and unfortunately, and this is the tragedy. In my view, this is like a very crossroads moment for Sonny Liston, and it very much exemplifies his career in a lot of ways in his
For
life.
a person who was on the fence, I believe I know exactly where you're going about this, and I
Yeah, as soon as he gets out, he starts getting groomed with the Italian mafia.
Frankie Carbo and Blinky Plumero, if I'm not mistaken.
That's
I'm
correct.
sorry,
That is correct.
Uh, yeah, Palermo.
Palermo was the last name. I can't remember the first name. Let's can
Here,
probably look that
here's the
up.
thing. I was watching like a documentary on Sonny Liston or like some YouTube video, and they kind of just buzzed past this Frankie Carbo guy. Bad
Harbo
man,
was a vicious, vicious,
bad
vicious
man
villain.
from the
Very,
start.
for
Here's the
sure.
thing too. Same grace I'll give everyone in a bad spot. Grew up into it. Early years though, at age of 11, they're sending him to the New York State Reformatory for Juvenile Delinquents. It's a reformatory school that is, we know very well that at those times it was not a reformatory school. That is just, it's gonna make it worse. It's
Yeah, Blinky
any
Blinky Palermo was the name. Just before we moved too far beyond, I wanted to make sure we got that exactly right. Blinky Palermo, Frank Blinky Palermo.
mhm.
I mean, these guys started grooming him as soon as he got out. It's not actually made clear that I could tell, at least, exactly where the initial connection got made for Sonny into the Italian mob. I mean,
Oh,
but wherever that moment is, and whoever's largely, I think it's mostly someone connected somebody. It's assumed that St. Louis mobster John Vitale um, was he kind of started grooming Sonny in a boxing sense, and he had ties to obviously the Italian mafia, and there was a connection obviously made. It could because he was tied in as well, and boy, what a turning point for his whole life. I mean, the kind of, what do they call it, a looking glass window, or a
Mhm.
looking glass moment, where you wonder what his life could have looked like. Because it seems to me that I could tell, it seems like Sonny Liston was a good person under there.
I
Um,
honestly, there's nothing other than his actual actions and like the situation he was put in that leads me to believe that he was a bad person. Um,
Likewise.
there really wasn't any time where he didn't initially try to do like the best thing he could and was some it's a terrible example of sometimes you really are just dealt a bad hand. You could be the champion of the world and just doesn't matter. Sometimes it just the stars don't align.
Yeah, it's almost like you get this is like this could Sonny Liston is an example of our social commentary, a socioeconomic commentary about the state of poverty and the state of I mean, you could tie it into some of the racial barriers that somewhat still exist in the world today, and especially in the United States today. I mean, his story is like an example. It's a bit of an extreme example you might not see a story play out like this today. After the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement, helped along to remove some of those barriers and really, push good progress that's still being made today and still being worked on today. But um, back then, you got to imagine that Sonny Liston was probably one of many extremely talented, good individuals who just got caught in the vicious cycle. Like, because it's clear that it's a cycle because every turn, he's if he's not affiliated here, he's going to run into an affiliation over here, and those two might be connected. And like it's hard to escape the associations with the degenerates of the underworld, we'll call it. um when they're just, and it's unfortunate because boxing was really infiltrated by a lot of this stuff at the time, the 40s and 50s and even into the 60s. There's quite a bit of fight fixing, quite a bit of mafioso affiliations that went all, the mob was as strong as it had ever been in the 50s, especially the Italian mafia. um and it's really unfortunate because he really just, like you said, it seemed like he'd take a step in the right direction or want to, but there's a wall here and there's a wall here and there's a wall here at every turn, and he would always just find himself kind of, and you hate to victimize him, but it's true. In my opinion, I think he is, in the most literal sense, a victim of poor associations more than anything
Hmm.
else.
And then just think about it like the same way the kids viewed him in school, and the same views as children. You see him, bad guy, no matter what. Big
Mm,
dude. Oh, look at his backstory. There's no way he can redeem himself. Even if he became champion of the world, no way
yeah,
that man can redeem himself. He was just
it's true.
always painted as a bad guy, as a monster. And
Yeah.
at some point, uh, uh, one of my favorite movies, Lucky Number 11, or no, what is it? Yeah,
Lucky number 11, you're right.
yeah. He goes, if someone calls you a horse, you call him a jerk. If another person calls you a horse, you punch him in the nose. But if a third person calls you a horse, you go get your feedback.
Ooh, wow.
They can only call you a bad guy so long before you're like, you know what? You're right. I'm just I'm it's easier to agree than to be like, well,
Right.
I know like I look scary and I beat people up and I used to, you know, be involved in the mob, but I'm that's I want to be a good guy now.
Right.
It's a hard sell, but
Not only
I
that, but
wholeheartedly believe.
it's also just an interesting, because I mean you're talking about like some of the more subtle, um some of the more subtle aspects of like poor affiliations or poor influence or poor you know associations that can lead. I mean, that's an example of like, you know um a more societal, a broad conversation about societal subtleties of either racism, some in this case, in a lot of cases, or socioeconomic judgment that can cross pretty much all racial boundaries regardless, because it's,
Hmm.
poverty is poverty no matter what race or ethnicity you are. Um, but in this particular case, this is the most extreme example because you're talking about career pressure and lifestyle pressure from people who are literally threatening your life, and they might not come out and say it, but the Italian mafia is
Uh,
suggesting your decision making. It's probably a good idea to follow along,
yeah, Frankie Carbo was arrested 17 times and charged with five murders.
including I believe they think he was responsible for the murder of Bugsy Siegel in Beverly Hills.
Really?
Yeah, so like this is a bad guy. This is a bad
Yeah.
guy front to back.
Um, and like yeah, like direct connections, like the like Italy Italian mob, like
Yeah,
like I feel like a lot of people go like, oh, like mob, and don't like no, like this guy was born in Sicily.
yeah,
He
he's
just
connected, very, very, very connected, and you got. I think they actually. I didn't read his story because obviously most of the research is going to be centered on Sonny Liston, but my assumption would be that East Coast guy largely. Probably had some connections to Lucky Luciano. Looks like it's mostly a lot of it went on in Philadelphia. A lot of the crimes, and some plenty in California too. So he made his way all over the country to apply horrific, violent pressure on fighters and whoever anybody who would dare cross him. Interestingly enough, if you've ever seen, on the boxing note, um, the character Tommy Como in Raging Bull, Tommy he's like a mob boss, was it was based on him in the film Raging
Okay.
Bull. Yeah, so that's which makes a lot of sense. The character of Jake LaMotta, we could possibly do a biography on Jake LaMotta one day, and what an unbelievable story he had too. But circling back, we'll try to stay on task here and just move Sonny's life story along. Um, it's at this point after he's released and he's starting to get groomed by the mob.
Kind of starts
Um,
looking up though.
does absolutely it
At least
does.
like it could.
Boxing is starting to become a thing for him, right? So
Hmm.
he's starting to box pretty legitimately. There's a lot of credentialism going on with his boxing career. He ends up capturing the Chicago Golden Gloves Tournament of Champions on March 6, 1953, with a massive victory over the 1952 Olympic heavyweight champion Ed Sanders. He would go on to outpoint Julius Griffin, winner of the New York Golden Gloves Tournament of Champions, and captured the Intercity Golden Gloves Championship on March 26th, representing Chicago. This was in 1952. Um, he then competed in 1953 United States National Championships at Boston Garden and passed the preliminary, stopping Lou Graff in the second round on April 13th. He did lose to a 17-year-old on April 15th by the name of Jimmy McCarter, who he would actually later employ as his sparring partner, interestingly enough. So his amateur career is going pretty well. Then, so his amateur career is kind of coasting along, moving through. He's racking up a lot of fight experience, which is great. He finally signs a pro contract in September of 1953. Um, it's a big moment for him, obviously, because he is now a legitimate pro boxer. He can start making pro money. You got to imagine the amateur career. It's not really said what he's exactly doing at this point to earn a living, but he's still I believe he's in Chicago at this point still, um, and
I
he
heard it was
is
implied that he was still kind of just being like some muscle, especially now that he was working so closely with mob guys. If they needed
yeah
someone just to stand around, that I mean, they know a bad guy.
yeah
Also,
yeah.
at this time, I believe Rocky Marciano was rocking up the title at this moment during his
In
amateur bouts.
1953, huh?
Yeah, I believe so. Didn't he? I believe he retired around 1955.
Yeah, I think that timeline sounds about right. I know that actually I should just for the record correct myself. I said Chicago. I meant St. Louis is where he's still at, and as his pro career is coming off, getting off the ground floor. Um, and the one note that this part of the story is actually, it's a very important one because it's revisited throughout the course of his life outside of the ring, and that he is just being harassed regularly by the St. Louis police um, force. He is he's having run-ins with he's had one run-in after another with the St. Louis police. I think at one point even it was mentioned that in some of my research that the St. Louis police officers had actually a picture of Sonny Liston on every patrol car on the dashboard of every
Um,
patrol car.
he
It was
was
either there or in Philadelphia. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
yeah, actually, yeah, no, after well, no, the prison boxing, if I'm not mistaken, was in Philadelphia, or was that right after it?
No, he hadn't gotten to Philly yet because he went to the Missouri State Penitentiary, so he was in prison in Missouri still.
I
Um,
do know that on top of them having or having the pictures of him on their in the cruisers, he was a known cop fighter. They're like, this guy will fight us. So
Right.
imagine just having everyone on edge. So here's the thing: you don't even get a picture nowadays. You get a picture on the internet for half of a
Yeah.
week. Like that
Right.
would Sonny Liston would anything like that would not even have worked nowadays. But I would hope that wouldn't be so tragic, like like trying to nurture like a talent like that. But yeah, he was a known cop fighter. What do you do? Well, wave to an officer? They're just gonna harass you for no reason. Like
Well,
that's
they were harassing him anyway because he's obviously abnormally big guy. And he did have mafia affiliations, so like you wonder what kind of scenes he's in. It's not to say that he's asking for attention from the authorities, but either way, even if he was, I think that largely he was getting a lot of undue attention because this is St. Louis in the 1950s. I mean, I believe it's still segregated, right? I mean, it would probably be still
oh
a
yeah.
segregated city. So, and you got to wonder. And by the way, he's also at this point, as we're moving along, he's now a professional fighter. So, like, he's making pretty good money as a professional fighter. Any professional fighter at this time is probably making somewhat decent money. I know that at one point, let's jump to 1953 here, September 2nd, when he makes his pro debut and he knocks out Don Smith in 33 seconds in the first round. I mean, good lord,
That's
like
about as good as you can get for a
it,
debut.
it's tough to. I mean, I know that it's the 50s and it's heavyweight boxing, but 33 seconds into the first round, I mean, he's making quick work. Um, it was there that he campaigned for the first 5 fights of his career. In his sixth bout in Detroit, Michigan, he faced John Summerlin, who was 22-0 at the time. And this fight would actually make it to national television, and Liston would take an 8-round decision. So he's now won a professional boxing match against an undefeated fighter, a fellow undefeated fighter at this point. Um,
Yeah.
and he won it on TV. So he's really making moves now. So moving along a little bit further, he actually does get a rematch with Summerlin. I believe it was an immediate rematch. Just take a look at his record here. I believe they go back to back with him. His first pro bout, John Smith. Nope, he actually does. Yep, he beats Summerlin twice. So he gets a unanimous decision in 8 rounds on TV in Detroit, Michigan. They go back to the same arena, Motor City Arena, Detroit, Michigan, August 10th this time in 1954 against Johnny Summerlin. And it's actually a split decision victory this time. And then comes the unfortunate part of his career. And this is when he actually suffers his first defeat. Um, he gets beat by what's the fighter's name? Marty Marshall by split decision. So it's boxing. I haven't watched that fight to see exactly what he looked like and what his if he had actually truly lost the fight or if it was controversial in any way. But he does take his first loss. And unfortunately, let's see. It says that in the third round of the fight, Marty Marshall, a defensive-minded journeyman, managed to break Liston's jaw with a right hand while Liston was laughing at the smaller man's unorthodox ring tactics. Liston proved his mettle by lasting the scheduled 8 rounds despite the intense pain. And I believe he was actually quoted as saying, like, my jaw, he hit me with a good one, but my jaw hurts, or my jaw doesn't hurt, but I can't close my mouth. So he knew his jaw was broken, but the adrenaline was enough to keep the pain off.
Or he's just been whipped his whole life, so he's just like, no, my jaw just doesn't work, and broken jaw. Oh, it just doesn't seem to function right. Just a bit wonky today.
Yeah. Yeah, that could
You
play
hit
a
me in the
factor.
jaw and I can't open it up. Oh my god, I'm panicking.
I'm gonna freak out, right? Of course. I mean,
Oh,
just
just
a tough person. Just such a tough man.
laughing at the guy.
Yeah,
The only
it's
reason
only
is
happened because he was taunting.
because he couldn't contain himself because he was just moving around the ring. Then he gets his jaw broken. Then he's like, I better. He's like, I better, you know, better straighten
Lock it.
up.
Yeah, no, and he
Better
did
lock it
too.
in.
And he
Oh,
made
I
it
can't
though. He
open up
made
my
it.
mouth. I better lock it in. Broken
I
jaw.
guess the pain did intensify throughout the course of the fight. So He
Okay.
it was a loss, but think about this though. What's funny, he got his jaw broke right when in the third round of this fight, right? Third round. He lasts all the remaining 5 rounds.
Split
So all
decision.
round split decision. That means he won
You
some
wouldn't know
rounds.
that the man broke. Dude,
He won some
if
rounds.
a fighter gets their jaw broken in the ring nowadays, if that happens,
Fight's over
over.
for sure.
Over. Oh my God. Like, not even. I don't. I don't think you can build someone nowadays with the wherewithal to, like, broken jaw, just be like, just a little, can't open it up so much. Like, and then also, like, you don't have like the ring men to be like, yeah, we gotta, like, you know what I mean? Like, nowadays
Yeah.
they go, oh, coach, I can't open up my jaw. Oh, just get back in there. You'll be fine. Like a mob boss. He's like, yeah, I don't care. Can you
Oh,
fight?
because it definitely
Get in
was.
there.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because it is, this is definitely the point of his career where he's still being groomed by the Italian mafia. They're largely involved in his fight booking. He's not a this isn't a man who's he's fighting, but he was quoted as saying when he started his professional career and signed his first contract, he was quoted as saying, "Whatever you tell me to do, I'll do it." And that was basically that may as well have been, I believe that was a media member that he had said that to, but he might as well have been speaking to the Italian mafia themselves because
Almost
I
the
think
man's mantra.
right that's what he's living by because he this is got to be somewhat like almost therapeutic for him to be able to fight in this way and to march to
Yo,
go to march towards a title.
and the craziest thing, this is a man without formal boxing training, realistically, until like this point.
Yeah, true. Yeah,
Like,
that's true.
outside of just a prison boxing system where they're just like, get in there and like kill each other.
Mm, it's true.
Like,
Yeah, his life is like one challenge and barricade after another, but like boxing is like a haven for him.
it was a
Clearly.
just imagine just a born genius in the sweet science.
Truly, no, it's and it shows in his career. Um, but unfortunately, as brilliant as he was, inside the ring, problems did arise outside of the ring. In 1955, April 21st, he did avenge that loss to Marty Marshall in the rematch, and he dropped him 4 times en route to a 6 round knockout. And they would have a trilogy fight, and Liston won the trilogy fight. So he not only avenged it, he won the trilogy. So that part of his professional career ends. However, um, he would find himself on the wrong side of the law again, very unfortunately. He his affiliation with the labor racketeering that was going on with the Italian mafia led the police to stopping him on site. He began to avoid main streets. On May 5th, 1956, a policeman confronted Liston and a friend about a cab parked near Liston's home. Liston assaulted the officer, breaking his knee and gashing his face.
Oh my.
Um, he also took his gun, and he
Oh,
claimed that the officer had been using racial slurs against him.
probably
This was,
was.
yeah, and you think it probably in St. Louis.
That's
Well, it gets a little more interesting. A widely publicized account of Liston resisting arrest, even after night sticks were allegedly broken over his skull, added to the public perception of him as a nightmarish monster impervious to physical punishment. He was paroled after serving 6 months of a 9 month sentence. It was not prohibited from boxing during 1957. After repeated overnight detention by the St. Louis police and a thinly veiled threat to his life, Liston left St. Louis for Philadelphia. So he'd had just about enough. And could you blame him? I mean, at this
the
point, he'd been
cops thought
hurt.
he was the boogeyman.
Yeah, so they're basically just paying attention to everything he did. Well, he was quoted. There's a beautiful quote I heard him say that I thought was so apropos of probably a lot of alpha male African Americans at the time. He said, "I'd go to the store to buy a stick of gum, and they thought it was a stick up." And it's like, yeah, I think that's probably a good analogy of what he probably went through pretty regularly. And his story is so like this in this way. And I don't mean to be like unsympathetic to him, but like he had a perfect marriage of being at the wrong place at the wrong time because of two things. poor luck and like being the product and victim of a racially segregated Midwestern United States, right? So like
Mhm.
all of those barriers, and also just really poor, probably avoidable decision making, right? Like there's certain things that man, like if you could have found what the right thing to do would be here, because like at the same time you think to yourself, the police were probably watching anyone who had affiliations with the Italian mafia. They were probably watching them all. But this
Yeah, but if the
individual,
mob tells you to jump,
exactly, he's like a prisoner in this way. And it's like, it's almost, I don't mean to excuse, I'm not trying to remove his victim status of the situation he's in. Because I do think that's what it is. I mean, he has nowhere to turn, right? Like at this
exactly.
point, specifically at this point, there's no out because once you're in with the mob, you're done. There's no other decision making to undergo. Um, but I do think that like while I assumed that there was racial profiling and racist violent behavior from the police force in St. Louis against him, including up to and including harassment and probably assault. Um, I do think that probably was due to A, his race, and B, also his poor affiliations, right?
Yeah. Um, I think he kind of gets wise to that too as he starts winning more and more of these fights just to be let down at every corner. Like at the next one too. How what fight were you talking about right before?
Oh, right. So basically, he went on a stretch where he had basically a trilogy against. At that point, it was kind of there were fights in between, but he had plenty of fights in between actually. So he suffered his first career defeat in September 7th, 1954, to Marty Marshall. He
And
come
then got the
he wins by points against Neil Welch. A handful of months later, he avenges it on April 21st, 1955. Then he strings off one, two, three, four victories, all by TKO, and then goes in there against Marty Marshall for a third time and gets a unanimous decision on March 6, 1956, Pittsburgh Gardens, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it's now at that point. So it was only short. It looks like it was probably shortly after that he is ready to leave Philadelphia, or ready to leave for Philadelphia. He wants to get out of St. Louis. He's had too many run-ins with the law, and I think he's ready. And he's also, I think, at this point, probably ready to start chasing,
right around the
championship.
title shot.
Yeah, he's going to be start moving towards the title. So we'll move into 1958. So I think he's still in a bit of trouble after this incident with the officer. Um, he wasn't allowed to box in 1957 because of that incident with the police officer. So the next year in 1958, he comes back, and this is stuff that you don't get to revisit now because it just doesn't happen anymore. Um, but in 1958, he comes back. He wins that fight in 1956. He can't fight in 1957 due to the obviously the criminal um, conduct policy that they had in place at the time. He comes back in 1958 and he strings off one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8 wins in a calendar year. That is absurd. That's absurd even for that time. To fight 8 times in a
Yeah.
year and to win them all. So now he's put himself. We're now at the end of 1958, November. I mean, he fought like almost once a month at that point, from January to November. And so now we're at November 18th, 1958, and he is now racked up. What would that be? A 15 fight win streak.
And out of those 8 fights, 6 of them were knockouts, if I'm not
Yeah, so he's
mistaken.
getting so the power is being realized by the heavyweight division across the country. A lot of them in Chicago, still fighting in the Midwest, but I think he's starting to his eyes are he's in Philadelphia. I think that's where he's that's where he's training, that's where he's living. Um, so this is a big moment where he's rattling off a ton of victories, and it's an important period. And as he wins all these fights, he gets a new manager, Pep Barone, who was a frontman for the mobsters Frank Carbo and Blakey Palermo. In 1959, it was a banner one for Liston, and he knocked out contender Mike DeJean in 6 rounds. Um, and I mean, at this point, he continues to rattle off victories. So we're going to move into where he goes from here, which is pretty clear. He is poised for a title shot here, and I think this is at the point in which he starts calling for one. He's having trouble getting fights, I think, at this point too. I think that
People are scared at this point.
well, I read that he was actually taking a lot of pay cuts to actually get these fights, so they would refuse him the title shot. All the way up into, I think, at the one point when Floyd Patterson, who was the heavyweight champ at the time, was starting to become interested in actually fighting him. John F. Kennedy, who was president at the time,
Yeah,
publicly
he asked
stated
him to do it.
No, he told him not to. He says don't. He didn't want him to fight. He actually insisted that he didn't fight Sonny Liston. At first, at least.
Right, because he does. I guess he said that publicly, but I guess he talked to Floyd Patterson privately, and he's like once like the fight was like confirmed, he talked to him again, and he's like, just beat him. He's like,
Yeah.
just beat him, prove that you are the prim and proper modern black man that can overcome the beast that is Sonny Liston.
Well,
He's
in
like,
all
just
fairness to JFK, and JFK was a very flawed individual for a lot of other reasons. I think that the goal, what he didn't want was because Sonny Liston had such affiliations with the Italian mafia that he wanted to avoid having a heavyweight champion who could have potentially been corrupted by the mob,
right.
which is fair in some capacity, but you know Floyd Patterson was a good champion and a great fighter, not an all-time great though. If you look at his overall career,
Great person though.
oh yeah, and they were great competitors.
Charismatic.
They both got along great even after the fights, and we'll get into that heavyweight title fight here in just a minute. So at this point now, right before the title fight, he's having trouble getting fights. He's taking pay cuts just to stay active. We're at a 15 fight winning streak, and then he goes in and fights. We're now up to a 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26 fights in a row he had to win to get this title shot. And all along the way, like I said, he's taking pay cuts. He's going all over the country. He's fighting in Seattle. He's fighting in Denver. He's fighting in Houston. He's fighting in Florida. He's fighting in Cleveland, and he's taking pay cuts. In fact, he's getting paid less than his opponents, even though it's at that point he's inevitable. He's truly inevitable. And it's quite a run he's on. He's marching towards that title, and he's finally going to get it. And he's going to get it against Floyd Patterson, and we're going to get into that fight here in just a minute. But we're going to take a quick break before we get into Sonny Liston at the peak of his career, athletically and competitively. And we'll be right back to talk about that here after the break, and we'll be back in just a moment. Okay, welcome back. We are back to talk about Sonny Liston in a heavyweight title bout. A unbelievable mark of a career that was, quite impressive. I mean, just to rattle off in a matter of a handful of years to win basically 26 in a row, to get to this point. His career record at the time when he gets there, he's 33-1. He gets a fight against Albert Westfall, and this is in Philly. And I mean, he puts a stamp on it too to get this title fight. He knocks him out in the first round, um, at minute 158. I mean, just unbelievable.
Oh, that's oof. Oh,
Just
actually,
real
no, yeah, I
quick.
was watching one of those highlights. He's a absolute animal, like you're saying, just stands there, just a true brawler,
True
willing
brawler
to willing to throw out more than he knows that his opponent can dish out, and
for
it's
sure.
scary. He is he's a Hulk of a man. Like that's and there's no amount of boxing that you can teach that can really defend anything like that. At least up until this point, it's a you're pretty much at his whim. You got to do. I mean, it's scary stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and his power really was translating at this point in his career, and it really did through most of his career. But man, he this was big. So he does book the title fight. Patterson finally signed to meet Liston for the world title, and this was going to be September 25th, 1962, in Comiskey Park, in Chicago. Leading up to the fight, Liston was an 8-5 betting favorite, although many picked Patterson to win. So it looks like the odds are pretty close, somewhat. But he's definitely a favorite. Um, and he just goes in there iconically and in unbelievable fashion, knocks Patterson out at the 2 minute and 6 second mark of the first round, putting him down for the count with that monster left hook. It's that left hook throughout his whole career. We should have mentioned this earlier. It's the left hook that does the damage for him. I mean, he had been knocking guys. It was mentioned that in prison he was knocking guys out with the jab,
Oh
but the
yeah,
left,
they're saying his jab was powerful enough to put you
right,
on the ground.
a piston, a true piston, and the left hook was more developed, and he used later in his career for a lot of knockouts. And that left hook to the jaw put Patterson to the canvas, at the 2 minute 6 second mark of the first round. So in emphatic
I'll
fashion, he is now the heavyweight champion of the world. And
I'll tell you what. Even at the start of that fight, during the stare down, Floyd Patterson doesn't look up, man. He does not
nope,
look up at that man.
no.
He's eyes flushed to the mat. Sonny Liston looking at him as as he would anyone else. He's not scared of anyone. But
Well,
I've
he
not
just
seen
looks
a
enormous. He just looks
yeah.
enormous too. Like, and Floyd Patterson was it. He was definitely a smaller heavyweight. It appears to me. But Sonny just looks. He looks fuller. He looks faster, and clearly more powerful. And there's a lot of clinch work that goes on throughout the fight. For as long as it lasted. Um, the the jab I think was doing the preliminary damage, and clearly it was Sonny who wanted to engage, not so much in the clinch. He was the one doing a lot of the clinch breaking,
Oh
and
yeah. I guess Floyd Patterson's his whole game plan was to get in as close as he can, work the body a little bit. Typical, easy to coach, hard to do when you're dealing with
of course,
the baddest person on the planet.
yeah, basically,
All you got to do is get in close where his 76-inch reach doesn't mean nothing,
yeah,
and he can't get
84
those
inch,
sledgehammers on you.
84 inch,
Oh
84
yes,
inches. You
yeah.
think
Sorry,
about that.
jeez.
76 for a 6'1" guy. 76 would be not bad, but it's clear that as the first round goes on, that like it's just a matter of time. He's landing the bigger shots, and he wobbles him up against the ropes. He's got to hurt, and he drops him with a left hook from hell, and
And this is
just,
the champion.
yeah, that's the champion of the world at the time. He is now officially the heavyweight champion of the world, um, and he defeats Floyd Patterson in emphatic fashion. So just an incredible feat. And unfortunately, and this is the part that really just a big, big marker of what I personally think changed Sonny Liston for the rest of his life was what happened um, after he became champion.
And what it's
Um,
crazy because nothing happened.
exactly, exactly right. Um,
Absolutely nothing happened. It was the he figured, all right, I had the this really rough life, overcame adversity. What else what else do I deserve? Maybe a welcome
well,
home.
yeah,
Thank you.
and he just couldn't get it. So upon winning the world heavyweight title, Liston had a speech prepared for the crowd that friends assured him would meet him at the Philadelphia airport. But upon arrival, Liston was met by only a handful of reporters and public relations staff. So literally only people who were paid to be there. No friends, no citizens of Philadelphia, no celebration. Can you imagine what the man had been through? Like the triumphant feeling that winning a world championship in probably the, if not maybe at that time, probably baseball would have been your number one American sport. Boxing a very close second, right? So like
And
in
in spectacular fashion.
unbelievable, yeah, truly, like truly an American feat, like a a moment in American sports that doesn't get enough it doesn't get enough credit or focus because I think what he overcame to get to that point was just so it was so treacherous and um I don't know, just to wash a guy like Floyd Patterson, who's the heavyweight champion, just to put him out on the canvas violently and viciously in that way, and then to just be completely deflated by a lack of support from Philadelphia. I know he wasn't from Philadelphia, but I mean, he was publicly there, and I guess his relationship with the people of Philadelphia wasn't great leading into the fight. But you got to imagine that's still got to be your guy, and it is a racially segregated country at the time. I understand that, but um, it was terrible, and it was quoted by writer Jack McKinney. He said that I watched Sonny. Quote: I watched Sonny. His eyes swept the whole scene. You could feel the deflation, see the look of hurt in his eyes. He had been deliberately snubbed. Philadelphia wanted nothing to do with him. End quote. Which is, I think this changed him. I personally think this is like a moment in which he,
It clicked. That's the third time he was called a horse.
yeah, right. That you're exactly right. I think that analogy comes into play really beautifully here in this moment, in his life. Um,
If that can't do it, absolutely nothing can.
yeah, yeah, because you get fighters and you get champions even now who you wonder, once they what is it? We'll bring up I believe it was Marvin Hagler who said this quote. It's like there's like the opposite problem sometimes. It's like it's hard to get up at 4 in the morning and go running and get out of bed when you're in silk pajamas, right?
Hmm.
So that's a problem. He never even got to that. He never even got to
No,
experience that. Like he got the heavyweight title, and all he wanted was the embrace of. And you could see this throughout his life. This is what he wanted was the embrace
he
from
was
his
he was
people.
never granted the grace of first world problems.
Exactly. True. True. Yeah, he could not be integrated. Even in a country that was going through a civil rights movement that was changing the views on on racial issues, um, and black public figures were being embraced by a swath of the country, and he was unfortunately excluded. And I think that's where things changed in his demeanor. And your horse analogy, is quite uh, apropos in this at this point in the story. Um, he continues anyways. His run-ins with the police had continued in Philadelphia. He particularly resented a 1961 arrest by a black patrolman for loitering, claiming to have merely been signing autographs and chatting with fans outside a drugstore. A month later, Liston was accused of impersonating a police officer by using a flashlight to wave down a female motorist in Fairmount Park. Although all charges were later dropped. Subsequently, Liston spent some months in Denver, where a Catholic priest who acted as a spiritual advisor attempted to help bring his drinking under control. After he won the title, Liston relocated to Denver permanently, saying, "I'd rather be a lamppost in Denver than the mayor of Philadelphia." Powerful stuff. Powerful,
Yep.
powerful, powerful stuff. So he'd had about enough, and it's really it is American racism in a lot of ways at that time that was driving a lot of this. It was pretty,
And
pretty terrible.
that just goes to show if you can't beat the system by literally being the world champion, what's your hope of just being an average citizen, man?
Right? It's just
You
it's
if you
helplessness
if
for
you
the
can't do it like that, then you can't do it, man.
right. You just can't be in a more advantageous position as a black man in the country. And
Media
you got to
attention,
remember, you got to remember,
someone can paint you as a hero, at least anti-hero.
not only that, but it's also important to remember, heavyweight champion of the world. You know, I don't know what kind of flashy behavior he exhibited. There's not really anything to indicate that he was that type of individual, but I do think at towards the later part of his career, he was, powwowing with like Sammy Davis Jr. and you just wonder what I'm sure at some point in a lot of these stories, Sonny was at fault for some kind of criminal behavior that he shouldn't have been doing. But it's hard. It's also impossible. It's not hard. It's impossible to believe that every interaction with a police officer in his adult life was brought on by himself. That's impossible. Um,
Right.
and I don't believe that one iota. I think he got harassed and he got driven out of town. And I don't think they wanted him as champion. So I think the police force in Philadelphia drove him out of town by harassing him to death. And some of that was probably brought on by himself, but a lot of it definitely wasn't. So he moves to Denver, and seems like things actually go pretty well for him while he's there. He gets married somewhere in that time frame. I know, and let me see when he actually got married. Well, he'd actually been married. He was in Philadelphia, but I think he had just gotten there in 1957. Um, he actually got married in St. Louis, but I think he was living in Philadelphia at the time. But importantly enough, he's the heavyweight champ. However, there is, of course, the famous rematch clause in the contract. So Floyd Patterson and Liston agreed, obviously, to a rematch, and they would meet again. They agreed to a date of July 22nd, 1963. This time, I believe, also in Las Vegas. Where was the first fight? Their first fight was in that's right, Comiskey Park in Chicago. So this time they're going to go to Las Vegas. He's training in Denver now, so um, closer to the epicenter of where this fight's going to go down. Um, and I think his life's a little different at this point in Denver. But I do think there was something going on in the background and that actually took place during the build of this fight, the promotional build for the first Patterson fight, and that is that I think Muhammad Ali started showing up, and at this point he was known as Cassius Clay, so we'll refer to him in this moment as Cassius Clay, and I think he starts showing up to see he interacts with Sonny in public quite a bit, and he starts calling him what he calls him the ugly bear, and he's like provoking him pretty regularly.
Muhammad Ali called a lot of people ugly, though. He called
Yeah, I
everyone
mean,
ugly.
he was just a shit talking motherfucker, wasn't he?
Well, I mean, what are you gonna do? Beat him up?
Exactly, exactly. I mean, he knew what he had. He knew what he had. But I don't know if it was the build for this fight or where it was, but Cassius was all over Sonny, and he
Yeah.
would see him at restaurants, and I think they crossed paths in Vegas, and they had some altercations that were pretty ugly. Um,
Is as early as 1960, yeah, or Cassius Clay was advising people on how to beat Sonny Liston. He was
yeah,
just like, just make him lose his temper. He can't, once you make him go all out, just like, play your game.
turned him into a berserker.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting.
Make him fight, then box him.
Yep. Yeah. So, well. that didn't work for Floyd Patterson because in
No.
1963, at this point in July 22nd in Las Vegas, Patterson, who at this point was a 4-1 betting underdog, so now he's big time underdog. I mean, he got knocked out in the first round of the first fight, so you got to imagine that makes a lot of sense.
Safe
Um,
bet.
yeah, and he's an underdog. He gets knocked down 3 times, and he is counted out at the 2 minute 10 mark of the first round again.
And I'll tell you what, even more so this fight, it didn't look like Patterson wanted to be there, man.
No, 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 no. Yeah, if you actually watch the footage, it almost appears like he enacted the rematch clause by obligation.
Right, like just you get paid something, but that he looked like he really didn't know if he had anything for him. And then when he showed up to fight, he's like, I don't know, I can't like get in his head, but it's when usually when you see like a boxing match, two confident individuals ready to step out in the middle of the ring. Patterson looked like a defeated man. He looked like he knew the outcome, and it was not in his favor, and it wasn't.
No, it really wasn't. It really wasn't. And the berserker thing is actually funny from Cassius Clay because you do kind of see that in Sonny's fighting styles. He's hyper aggressive and
You
he wants to apply pressure, and you just see a lot of that.
you
That he wants to break clinch quite a bit again in
you know
this
I
bout.
after watching the fights, there's almost some parallels in the Liston Patterson compared to the Liston Clay. Uh,
Yeah, a little bit. You could definitely see some
there's
fighting styles.
they're both
Different.
it's a perfect baton pass of eras from in the solid chain link in the fence being Sonny Liston. You have the before era where Sonny Liston comes in and absolutely just dominates, steamrolls almost everyone through there. And if they did beat him, he came back and he beat them. Um, and then you have Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, the arguable greatest athlete of all time. Um, it's like so polarizing for Sonny Liston to come in and beat the champion in such a spectacular fashion, and then in Liston Clay 1 get beat in such a spectacular fashion.
Yeah. So Liston, that's perfect segue, Errol. It's Liston versus Clay, number one. It's the first of 2 fights. Um, and this is it gets a little confusing with the name change, and we'll get into a little bit of that. But I'm sorry, Cassius Clay at the time is just, I mean, he is just talking wild shit, just reckless shit to Sonny Liston pretty regularly and very publicly. And you can tell that this is starting to become a bit of his persona. um, I mean, he was quoted as saying, "If you want to lose your money, then bet on Sonny." I mean, like this dude was. I mean, he had the gift of gab like no other. I
He
mean,
pretty much
true.
he almost so
And
like you said, boxing right behind baseball at the time. Oh my, like just skyrocketed the popularity just with the controversy.
oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, the
And just
controversies
the fact that he was such a brilliant orator
for sure, yeah,
just
yeah.
sold he would sell daytime television tickets.
All press is good press too. Like that's the old adage. I mean, that's how you promote fights. It doesn't matter. It's and it got a little ugly in my opinion.
It
I don't know
always
if
does
it.
with so I want to love Muhammad Ali, but a lot of his stuff gets ugly, man. If you really look under it, well, I mean everything gets ugly when you look under it with a fine scope, but there's just really there's some things he does for that I just really wish that I don't know. Like it's all fights, all that fun stuff. Boxing wouldn't be as popular as it is without that, and also maybe he wouldn't be as polarizing as a figure without that. But I don't. There's some stuff, man, that just doesn't sit well. I mean, yeah, but they're punching each other. They're calling each other names. Like I can't be mad about that. I'm not a fighter. I'm not a
Yeah,
pugilist. I'm not gonna.
but I wasn't. The one thing, and that's all very true, and I tend to agree. At the end of the day, these guys are going to settle it with fists, and that's great. But I don't know, like even in hindsight, and I know it was a sensitive time in the country, but I believe at one point he referred to the fight as like this fight represents Islam versus Christianity, and like for me, that's like a bridge too far. Like
Yeah,
I
like
don't
what?
know,
Like
why are
I
we
mean, the
bringing in like it's athletics, you know? I don't know why that has to be a part of the build. And I think
and like
probably it's
I didn't.
probably would it was probably regretted by Cassius Clay in hindsight, I wonder. But I personally think that stuff gets a little ugly and it's kind of unnecessary.
Yeah, like in the only way I can even play devil's advocate for that is if he was trying to like argue like it's a battle of like faiths, but that is like that's really it. Like, but like to be like this is like a direct demonstration of like Islam against Christianity, especially at that
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Kind of
I think it was unnecessary, and I think it was well. It's just like
and
I mean, just look at who your opponent is. Is your opponent espousing like? First of all, is your opponent doing anything to espouse
I
anything
was gonna say there's almost
resembling?
nothing we talked about that was okayed in the Bible
No,
that Sonny
Sonny's
Liston has
life,
done.
right? Sonny Liston is not walking around, living by the word of Jesus Christ. I mean,
He's been
he's
far in
doing
the
what he's got
shadow.
to do. Yeah, exactly. Perfect word for it. Perfect description. Um, but anyway, so the fight build begins. Cassius Clay, he's the gift of gab is quite remarkable. I'm not going to recite his like unbelievable poetry. I could never do it the justice that it's deserved, but feel free to look up any of his interviews he did leading up to this fight. Great build to another heavyweight championship fight, and a pretty incredible fight it was. Let's dive into the fight, Errol. Let's dive into we're going to take a quick short really short break before we dive into Liston versus Clay #1, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. We're gonna get into it. This is a big fight. This is a big fight in the history of the sport. It's an important fight for a lot of reasons. It's culturally significant. It's not just a fight. It had its own really took on a life of its own after the fact for a lot of controversial reasons and quite unfortunate ones in a lot of ways. So the first fight is quite an undertaking. It was they weighed in pretty close, but I think actually Sonny weighed in, about 8 or 9 pounds heavier. And Well, Ali was definitely a bit taller. He was a little bit taller, but a little bit lighter. And then when you watch the fight, I mean, you watch these guys going at it. I mean, it's like I don't know what you
And
think, Errol, but Muhammad Ali, or I'm sorry, Cassius Clay at the time, he looks enormous to him.
yeah,
He looks
and
enormous.
it's so he looks big compared to Sonny Liston, and on top of that, it's one of the first times in any of these black and white boxing videos that you see someone running around the ring,
Yeah, it's so
utilizing the
true.
whole space,
Mhm.
making them approach, making them step back. It was truly you could tell that this was truly the start of an era, and all that all the smack talk, as reckless and wild as it is from Muhammad Ali, he was absolutely ready to back it up.
Oh yeah, I mean this is like the definition of the squared circle because I mean, he is literally evading and super defensive, but like when he throws hard. I mean, this is where you really see. Muhammad Ali slash Cassius Clay at the time, just like dropping his hands. He's Anderson Silva, right? Like he looks like Anderson
Yeah,
Silva, prime
exactly.
like unbelievable head movement, just cannot be touched, can't hit what you can't see.
And the
Uh,
confidence. This is the strongest person, or this the strongest punching person in the world at the time, and
mhm.
then just weaving the punches by inches, centimeters.
And
Just
dropping his hands. His hands are at his waist the whole fight, unless he's
yes,
throwing.
he was
Like
yeah,
he's
and
only has his guard is only up when he is trying when he knows a counter punch
he'll
is coming.
exactly he'll parry he like parries a couple, like puts his hands up like to his chest a little bit, hands at his hands at his hips,
Mhm.
holstered.
Unbelievable. Yeah, it's an unbelievable performance. And um,
Who
Sonny gets carved up. I mean, let's
what can
just
you do? How can you answer that? This is Sonny Liston. The his whole backstory and the sole reason he's so great at fighting is simply because he's the literal baddest man on the planet at that time.
yeah, right.
There's not one person who is just going to like it's probably like a bad analogy, but I play a lot of video games. He reminds me of like a Fallout video game character who just has you're just born with 10 strength. Just 10 strength, that's
Yeah.
one of your things. If you hit someone, like you're just absolutely built different.
Could
Um
floor him, right? You could
the
put him to the canvas with the right
you
shot, but you
the
have to land
only
the right shot.
exactly. And like the only person, like what it would take to beat a man like this is literal greatness. And like that
True.
greatness in Cassius
Happened to
Clay,
be
Muhammad
happened
Ali.
to be happened to be Cassius Clay at that time. It's so true.
And the main difference is he was a Muhammad Ali, or sorry, Cassius Clay at the time studied pugilist, grew up on it.
Mhm.
Um Sonny Liston grew up in the fields and in prison,
Right.
and and was bossed around by the mob.
Well, it's
Everything
interesting.
he learned was just by practice.
Yeah, and then nobody knew it at the time, but it really was. Nobody knew it because Sonny Liston was heavyweight champion, and for which is reason A, and reason B is that um, nobody knew it at the time because Muhammad Ali was Cassius Clay, 19-0 boxer at the time. Um, but it really was a David versus Goliath moment. I mean, but they just did. We just didn't know it, or we know it now, but they didn't know it then. Um,
It might have been exactly reversed.
what do you
They
mean?
might have been like, I don't like, because after it, like if you're a serious I mean, I don't if you I mean I imagine like being no, there's probably some people who knew that Muhammad Ali was just like the actual up and coming like talent, but if you read those stats, the champion, nothing but knockouts, crushed Floyd Patterson, that's a once in a lifetime talent. Is the next person who's going to be the greatest fighter of all time just going to walk in?
No,
He
that's what I
happened to.
mean, though. That's
He
exactly what I
happened
mean.
to. Yeah.
I think that, well, because he was a betting underdog, I think that Cassius Clay was Goliath, and they just didn't know it. And Sonny Liston, the farmer, the not the technical prowess holder in the fight, the brawler with no education but learned to fight in prison he was David. He was David, and
Absolutely.
but it was just not perceived that way because the career hadn't unfolded for Cassius Clay quite yet that it inevitably became.
And then, of course, Muhammad Ali would phrase that as him beating Goliath
Mm-hmm.
when
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like, but
right. Of
that's
course.
uh
But that's Muhammad
and at the
Ali.
time, man, at the time, I'll give it to him. That's the baddest man on the planet. I will. Uh it's a lot easier for me to talk candidly about Muhammad Ali because he can't beat me up anymore. So
Yeah, he is unfortunately no longer with us. So
yes, so that
um
is about the only reason I feel comfortable talking about almost. You'll notice I was pretty silent in the beginning talking about boxers, except for Errol Spence Jr. Shout out, but
shout out. Big fighter, big fight coming. So I did want to mention though in this fight there was a little bit of controversy because there was Cassius Clay was winning the fight. He was very clearly winning the fight. Although, there were, Liston had his moments where he would shove his forehead into
When
into his chest and start and just let off like a 5 punch combination. But he could just not pin down where Cassius Clay was going to be to land that big shot. And there was a little bit of controversy at one point. Liston rallied at the end of the round in the this would be the third. Um, as Clay seemed to tire a bit, and he delivered some punishing shots to Clay's body. It was probably Liston's best moment in the entire fight, but as the round ended, Clay shouted to him, "You big sucker, I got you now." Sitting on his stool between rounds, Liston was breathing heavily as his cornerman worked on his cut. During the fourth round, Clay coasted, keeping his distance, and Liston appeared dominant. Joe Louis, commenting on TV at ringside, said, "It's looking good for Sonny Liston." However, when Clay returned to his corner, he started complaining that there was something burning in his eyes and he could not see. "I didn't know what the heck was going on," Angelo Dundee, Clay's trainer, recalled on an NBC special 25 years later. He said, "Cut the gloves off. I want to prove to the world there's dirty work afoot." And I said, "Whoa, whoa, back up, baby. Come on now. This is for the title. This is the Big Apple. What are you doing? Sit down." So I get him down. I get the sponge and I pour the water in his eyes, trying to cleanse whatever's there. But before I did that, I put my pinky in his eye and I put it into my eye, and it burned like hell. There was something caustic in both eyes. The commotion wasn't lost on referee Barney Felix, who was walking towards Clay's corner. Felix said Clay was seconds from being disqualified. The challenger, his arms held high in surrender, was demanding that the fight be stopped, and Dundee, fearing the fight might indeed be halted, gave his charge a one-word order: run. So never really confirmed, but it was but Cassius Clay did claim that there was some kind of a coating or something on Sonny's gloves. I think that's bullshit to me. I don't know that I believe that. Um, I think that I just don't see that being a tactic. I mean, Sonny
what
Liston was
what perfect mafioso tactic? Just poison your gloves, Sonny. You can get them. Punch him in
yeah,
the eyes with the poison gloves. Take
yeah. I
him out
mean,
in the fifth.
he. I know he's 19-0, but like, I mean, Cassius Clay wasn't Cassius Clay. You got to think Sonny Liston probably thought he was going to win this fight, right?
It was
I
probably like
mean,
just the first time like he had like sweat and blood in his eyes. He's like, it stings.
yeah. And at that point, the fight was kind of starting to go the other way. But Cassius Clay clears his eyes and he starts taking the fight back over. Um, and Then what happens is, as the bell sounded for the seventh round, Clay was the first to notice that Liston had spat out his mouth guard. Clay moved in the middle of the ring with his arms raised, dancing the jig that would become known as the Ali Shuffle, while Howard Cosell, broadcasting at ringside, shouted, wait a minute, Sonny Liston is not coming out." Liston failed to answer the bell for the seventh round, and Clay was declared the winner by technical knockout. Liston became the first world champion since Jess Willard in 1919 to retire on his stool during a heavyweight title fight. At that point, the bout was level on the official scorecards of the referee and two judges. So he quit on the stool, Errol. What do you think? What do you think
I
about
think
that?
that's a man who was pushed to the absolute limit of what a person can take.
Yeah.
Um, if he did have the wherewithal to reach in there and get that magic left hook in and just shovel him down, as anything can happen in boxing. You get hit one time by the strongest person in the world at the moment, you're going to sleep. Like, you're getting rocked. At that moment, what's the point? He won the championship before. No one met him when he made it to Philadelphia, and now he's facing like true adversity. Someone who is, talking all this shit. For some reason, he's loved and adored. He has all this backing. What's the point? Give it to him. What are at that point? What are we really fighting for? And that almost leads directly into the second fight.
Yeah, we're gonna get into the second fight. That's a big it's a big one. I mean, it's a big fight. I guess before we move on from that though, there was talk of a shoulder injury from Liston, but I don't want to even I don't want to speculate on that. But I do want to talk a little bit about there were allegations that the fight was fixed. We don't have to go into the dirty details of all that. I mean, I'll just say this. I wouldn't pay it any credence personally because I just don't see any incentive for Sonny to There's just no incentive for.
You don't see Sonny Liston boxing any different than he does in the other fights. He just doesn't have any answers for him.
It's a new style. It's a different style of fighter. And Cassius just looks faster and better. By the way, what does the Italian Mafia gain uh from
Losing.
from Cassius Clay being champion? It just doesn't make sense. The more you listen and read about it, it just there wasn't a ton of evidence for it either. I mean, there were some, there was some things here and there that were said. We're not going to dive into those details honestly because I just personally think that I think it's mostly speculative and there just wasn't any evidence to support any kind of fixed claim in the first fight, specifically the first fight. We'll talk about
Oh,
the
thank
second
you for
fight.
yeah, like in the first.
Yeah, well, I will specify the first fight because we're gonna get into the second fight. So
I
um
wholeheartedly agree with that statement, though. The first fight, I
yeah,
believe that was a
no
tried and true
fix.
effort,
Yeah,
but you're
no
facing
fix.
just the
Just got beat.
greatest talent of almost any generation.
Yeah, truly an all-time great. So let's dive into the fight. Fight number two. So it got scheduled. It actually got scheduled to take place once before the actual date. Um, so they did want to do it. I don't know if it was a clause, if it was actually in the contractual clause for them to do a rematch. But the rematch was going to happen, and there was public demand for it, thankfully. Um, and in between fights, Cassius Clay does change his name to Muhammad Ali, and specifically has a lot of at this point developed a lot of ties to the Nation of Islam and was spending a lot of time in the civil rights. I believe at this time even um, the Civil Rights Act had been passed, I believe. But there was still obviously a civil rights movement going on, and Malcolm X was deeply involved in that, and he was held a lot of affiliations with Muhammad Ali at the time. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this would have been 1965 that the fight actually took place, but it was scheduled once before that. It was set for November. Yes, right here. Set for November 16th, 1964, at the Boston Garden. So it was going to go down in Boston, right? But a week before the fight, on Friday the 13th, Ali needed emergency surgery for a strangulated hernia. So they would delay the bout. And according to the research that I kind of listened to, and I'll actually supply some links to a couple of podcasts I went through. Um, it sounded like Sonny Liston was having the camp of a lifetime leading up to that original date, and it seemed as though he was as confident and as focused as his team had ever seen him on winning back that title. And um, I personally think that fighter for fighter, I don't see a path to victory for Sonny Liston against Muhammad Ali. What do you think?
Oh, see, other than the tried and true boxer's chance, absolutely not.
Like a puncher's chance, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah, like a
exactly.
knockout, like an
Anyone can just get hit and hit the ground. Well, not like anyone, but at that stage, you we're dealing with a lot of force. So,
sure.
but there was really no chance that it was even close. But also, we're here's the thing that gives a little or fires the flames of like the dive. We're talking about the man. He got his jaw broke and fought, you know, three other matches. And here's the thing: Sonny Liston gets punched by Muhammad Ali in that fight.
Right.
He gets hit. It doesn't look like it's like a strong punch,
You're
but
referring to the what is known as the phantom punch, correct?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yep. So we'll get right into that because it looks like the way the fight unfolds. Let me unpack the fight quickly, and we'll go right
Mhm.
into the phantom slash anchor punch. Um, so yeah, they circle a new date, May 25th. This time they're going to do it in Lewiston, Maine, which I don't even understand for a second why they went to this small. I mean, it's such a such a crazy. It's like the one of the most important fights in the history of boxing, and they're doing it in a
Oh yeah.
Lewiston, Maine. Good for them.
And at
Um,
this point, like you're saying, Cassius Clay changes his name to Muhammad Ali. He's picking up even more speed. As far as
mhm,
media.
right. Yeah, I mean it's an important time for both fighters, and a pivotal moment for really both of them for sure. You could definitely say for both of them. Definitely more so Sonny Liston though, right?
Yeah.
So the fight unfolds, and it goes the way of Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali is victorious, in what is a extremely controversial second fight. In the second fight, and it's so funny because like I mean anyone who has seen the footage of the second fight, it's tough to find good footage, but in the first round, um, Muhammad Ali lands a shot. Whether or not he actually knocks him out cold is up for debate. It's called the Phantom Punch specifically because it appears as though Sonny Liston doesn't get hit, and immediately the crowd and the teams, it's tough to see, and it looks like Ali hits him. I mean, he definitely
At
hits.
the very least, it looks like a very like nonchalant, like kind of typical just boxing punch, something that you see
Yeah,
people take all the time.
right. But just the way that, I mean, you can slow it down over and over. You can slow it down over and over. But Sonny goes down, and he goes down in this emphatic way that has never been seen before, from him.
Arms
Um,
out.
Arms out on his back, and then he tries to get up and falls back down. And of course, it's important to remember too, and you never know this until you go into the stories of these incredible fights. But Muhammad Ali, the it's probably the most famous picture of Muhammad Ali, right? The
Yeah,
one
where
where
he's
he's
just
standing
standing
over
over
him.
him.
It's
Yeah.
which is so crazy because I don't think I would have ever known that that was potentially
I
over a
didn't know that
fixed
that was
fight.
the picture until I started looking into this, and that's Sonny
It's
Liston. He's
it's
just
Sonny
standing
Liston
over him, like, and he's
standing
just
over,
like
and
he has his hand on his chest. He's just like, I'm the baddest person.
hold on, I want to see. I want to credit the photographer who got this. Let me see. It's probably got its own page. This is the Sonny Liston photo in Lewiston, Maine, and it was captured by what do we got? He told him, he's yelling at him. He says, "Get up and fight, sucker!" And he didn't. He did not. It's an amazing photo. I mean, it's one of the. It's if you go through like the history of American sports, you would be well within your rights to put that the number one most iconic sports photograph, right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah. Oh my
just
god, yeah.
so famous. And to think, and this is what we'll get into now. I think he took a dive.
You think
And
he did?
he all but admits it later in life. Yeah, I do. And whether or not he hit him, if they call it the Phantom Punch, I think it's irrelevant. I think it's irrelevant.
Yes.
I
I
think he.
so I
Go
think
ahead.
he was I think he would they told him to dive sometime at that point. It's almost impossible to ignore with his history and his previous the his previous uh sorry, the uh the
The previous bout.
no the his old boxing guys, the old mob contractors with Frankie Carbo.
Frankie Carbo. Right, right. His
Yeah,
affiliations to the mafia.
his old managers. Like there's
Mhm.
almost there's no way to ignore that affiliation. Like it would just make too much sense, especially if he lost in such spectacular fashion. It is so while I do want to say it is kind of weird that like he would why would he why would he train so hard if he's just gonna take the fall? Might just be like the last fight and he's just upset, just really
Well,
mad.
I think what happened was is I think the training was going the way that he wanted, where he was confident, leading up to the Boston date, right?
Hmm.
And then the emergency hernia happens to Ali, and things shift. And what is, you know, they call it the Phantom Punch because it's Ali called it the anchor punch. And Ali doesn't even remember. He said he hit him so fast. He was pretty sure he hit him. He didn't really hit him hard, but he was. And um, what is and then remember at this point, there and I don't think this was mentioned, so I'll mention it here. It's important to remember that there was negotiations for both of these title fights that Ali was to prove, or I'm sorry, not Ali, that Liston was to prove that his affiliations with the mafia were cut, that those ties were cut. Um,
Hmm.
so because of this very thing, they were concerned that this very outcome was possible. Um, so they did that. And I don't know, that doesn't necessarily exonerate anybody, right? Um,
Well,
and it seems as though to me, and it was mentioned later in Sonny's life, and we'll get a little bit to this here in a few minutes. Sonny does admit in an interview that as Muhammad Ali's career continued, that he complains in an interview that he was owed money for Ali fights that were going on in the later in the 60s and 70s. And
hmm.
the implication there was that he had agreed to take a dive for a percentage of future purses of Muhammad Ali by mafia members, right?
Oh,
That Muhammad Ali's team, and maybe Ali didn't even know. It's possible that he didn't even know that that all he had to do was try to knock him out, and that he was going to hit Liston a couple of times, and one of them he might not have known a thing. He might not have been privy to it, but the percentage of it was it's been rumored that a percentage of his purses would go to Liston for taking this dive.
yeah, no, makes sense.
And Liston says that, like I said, Liston does mention that in an interview, so it's speculative. I personally think it's probable.
I'll
And
tell, I'll,
I'll tell you why later once we get into the latter stages of Sonny's life. But
I'll tell you what though. If you look at that Phantom Punch, Muhammad Ali, he cocks that right hand, he hits Sonny Liston with it, and from the angle that it's viewed at, you see that punch ripple from the top of his head through like the back right, like a lat of him.
mhm.
And then you also see that ripple recoil back from Muhammad Ali's hand and then just go right through his right breast. Like it perfect boom. You see it through his Sonny Liston's whole body, boom, and then you see it ripple through Muhammad Ali's chest coming back. Like he hit that man hard. Um, I believe he took a dive, but whether there was money or not on the line, I think he was just speeding up the inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said. Well, it's quoted as being the fight that like launched one man's career and ruined another. And I think that's largely true. Um, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, in the final analysis, let's read this. In the final analysis, it remains inconclusive whether the blow in Lewiston was a genuine knockout punch. The fact that Liston didn't complain about the clear breach of boxing rules being declared knocked out without a count, and Ali's obvious state of bewilderment shouting at Liston, "Nobody will believe this," and asking his handlers, "Did I hit him?" confirm most people's belief that Liston took a dive. Um, in my opinion, I think I'm with you, and I think it's both true. I think those shots landed, but I don't think they landed in knockout fashion. I think that they landed enough for Liston to say, "This is the one I'm going down with," and I
Yes,
think the
like I'm
dive
waiting for a
followed.
fall. That's a good punch.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I do think that it's terrible, and this is the tragedy of Sonny Liston. You know, because I just think that the man had so many demons, and he had so many demons in I use this word deliberately to be ironic, but in so many masters. Um, and I don't mean that in a I do mean that in a racial sense in some ways, and then in other ways I mean his own masters. Because I just think that he was a victim of his own environment, but
I
also a
mean,
victim of his own trauma.
you're apprehensive to say that, but I mean, even he was quoted. He's like, "Just tell me what to do."
Yeah, yeah. It's a horrible tragedy, and I think deep down he probably I wonder if it was one of the great regrets of his life. And we'll get into that. We're gonna get into that next. We're gonna take a quick break, one more break, and then we're gonna dive into the aftermath of Liston Ali 2, and the Phantom Punch, and what happened to Sonny Liston following that incredible iconic moment. So hang with us. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. We're back. We're going to talk a little bit here, a little bit further about the aftermath of an unbelievable career, um, a great career too. By the way, I don't want it to sound like it's all, tragedy for Sonny Liston. He had an amazing boxing career. His life in the ring was quite impressive. One of the greatest careers of all time. I mean, the 26 fight win streak, um, the four iconic heavyweight championship fights in a row across 3 years was, a moment in sports history not to be underspoken of. But after the Phantom Punch and after that very controversial knockout loss to Muhammad Ali, he would go on. He'd move to Sweden, and continue his professional career there, and he would go on to really find even more success in the sport. He'd rattle off four victories over in Sweden. He would come back to America in 1968 and fight Bill McMurray in Nevada, returning to Vegas. And he would actually go on another 13 fight win streak after that Muhammad Ali loss. So it's not as though he was washed, right?
Right. Well, I
Like,
mean, once a bad person, always a bad person. You can't. He he's not. He would never be washed up because he was never taught. You know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
He was just the baddest man in the room.
Yeah. Yeah. He
Short
just
of
was.
condition or short of like traditional pugilism, you had to
Right.
study the art of boxing to be better than this man. And even
Yeah.
then, it's a coin flip.
And he did actually get another crack at an heavyweight championship, in 1969, to Leotis Martin. Unfortunately, he would get knocked out in the ninth round of that fight. It wasn't the last time he saw the ring. He did end on a positive note. He took a couple of months off, and then he got back into training and fought Chuck Wepner, to close out a career. It was, he ends on a victory, which is good, but it seems like things outside of the ring are starting to truly fall apart, for him. I think that he became involved in a lot of, and basically a second life. I mean, he was married, with children. I believe he had fathered several children, but I don't think he had much of a relationship with any of them, even before this point in time. Um, I think he remained mostly illiterate through most of his adult life. And unfortunately, things took a pretty dark turn for him. It seemed as though like I said, he had been doing interviews, and it seemed like he had been saying some things publicly, He'd become involved in cocaine use. He was spending time with Sammy Davis Jr., like I said, and in Vegas and sort of living that Vegas lifestyle. A lot of recreational drugs, a lot of alcohol, and a lot of addiction seemed to be a part of the story. Um, and unfortunately, that Errol, before I get to the tragic conclusion, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, the only thing, so with him being so closely, tied with all the the dark side of society, that tends to brush up on you. And it was rumored by a couple of his trainers, Johnny Tuco and his I believe one of his managers that were on the up and up, Jack Nillen. It was rumored that on top of the cocaine use, he did like heroin or did use heroin as well. But
Right.
you can only play with fire so much before you get burned.
Yeah, and the thing about the heroin considerations, and this is where things get a little bit strange and bizarre with the end of his life, is that it was very clear that he was using recreational drugs and he was living a double life, and it seemed like he had. Um, there's a funny story that was told on this podcast. I'll reiterate it here, and I apologize to the authors of the podcast who presented this story, but I just thought it was really a funny note. Um, he was in England once, and he at this point he had been pretty much involved in quite a few affairs with and prostitution and such. And according to the story, he paid £10 for a lady of the night. And when addressed about it, he said £10. That's all you paid. He's like, I think you underpaid for her. And he said, yeah, well, what about all the sandwiches she ate? which in my opinion is a like what do you mean he's charging these prostitutes for the sandwich for feeding them, which I mean
Yo, man, if she could step up to the table, she could buy the sandwiches. You ain't playing.
he basically invoiced a prostitute for feeding her, which you came up here and ate some sandwiches. So
Hey, if it's a transaction we're doing, a
hey
transaction
man,
was
that's
had both ways.
food ain't free. That's all I'm saying. But regardless, that's just a funny tidbit. And it's not funny, the story's not funny because it's sad where his life went, but I thought that was a pretty funny anecdote. um,
What about the sandwiches?
what
How
about
much?
them goddamn sandwiches she was eating? I mean, good lord.
Let me
Um,
get I'll give you eight.
I mean, she didn't put up a fight. He was addressed later for her, so
I
she
mean, I
clearly
hope she
was
wouldn't.
fine. Yeah.
Anyone in
Um,
Where was he when that happened?
he was in
In
England because it was
Yeah,
for
dude, anyone would be
the
hard pressed to put up a fight there in England at that time. I don't know exactly how the English boxing scene was, but you're looking at the baddest man on whatever side of the globe he's on,
yeah. I
or
don't even think
rather,
this was. I
whatever
think this
side
was
of the globe
after that
Muhammad Ali
too.
is
Right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Whatever he's not, whatever side he's not on. Right. On a less funny note, so on January 5th, 1971, he was unfortunately found dead by his wife in their Las Vegas home. On returning home from a 2 week trip, his wife had smelled a foul odor emanating from the main bedroom, and on entering, saw him slumped against the bed, broken foot bench on the floor. And authorities theorized that he was undressing for bed when he fell over backwards with such force that he broke the rail of the chair of the bench. Um, and it seems as though to me there's a lot, and this is where it gets kind of sad because he unfortunately he died very young. It's estimated that he was probably somewhere around 40 years old. So I mean, it's just horrible and a horrible way to go. Um, because it appears that though there was a lethal injection of heroin that produced that officially was that killed him of lung congestion and heart failure. Right.
Mhm.
Um, however, and this is where things get weird. There was a there was a small amount of heroin in a balloon found in the kitchen, right?
Hmm.
And his loved ones had come in, and when he was found dead, they called, obviously, they called an ambulance. They didn't call the police, I believe. And he had been dead for a really long time. So that's a little weird already, right? Because, like, I mean, I guess it's not that weird,
Think
frantic
about it.
wife.
Call the yeah.
Yeah, frantic wife. She doesn't know what to do. That's not
I
that
need an
weird. But
ambulance. He's
yeah,
not moving.
he's super dead. But what is weird is that it was his official toxicology report was that he was too decomposed for the test to be conclusive of anything. However, there was heroin found in the house, and it seems as though that it was a lethal injection of heroin. Right. However, it was largely known by quite a few people that he was like deathly afraid of needles.
Hmm.
Right.
That's what I was gonna add.
And including his up to his, he would have dental procedures done without anesthetic because he was so afraid of these needles. So we're talking very,
And
very,
this is a
very
man who
afraid.
had his jaw broken and didn't care, so he probably wasn't scared of a couple needles and scrapes and or not needle, but a couple like pries and scrapes from a. He's like, just don't poke me with the needle, dude. Pull what you want, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Right, exactly. So, and there were no syringes or needles found on the scene. However, this balloon of heroin was found, and like if the family came in to clean the home, to clean up because they didn't want him found in that state, and they're going to conduct an investigation as to what happened here, and they wanted to clean it up, but they didn't grab the heroin in a balloon, and like it's reported that it was a quarter ounce of heroin, which is a pretty significant amount of heroin. Um, in my opinion, because there was no spoon to cook the heroin found, there was no tourniquet to wrap around his arm, there was no, um, the heroin was there. There was a small amount of marijuana as well, but there really was no drug paraphernalia to be found, and that could have been cleaned up. But why not the heroin as well? In my opinion, what happened was is that Sonny had been kind of given up the go a little bit on the fight fix with Ali because he had been complaining that he wasn't getting paid, right? And
Yeah.
I think that what happened, I personally think that what happened, it's been reported that at that time that was an actual method of murder by the Italian mafia is lethal injection.
Ooh.
And I think that because he had been talking so much about not getting paid his due from from Muhammad Ali fights, he said something along the lines of Ali keeps winning, but I'm not getting paid. And like that's an indication to me that that fight was A, fixed, and B, that the mob felt no use to pay him or weren't paying him timely enough. And then he started voicing himself, voicing his grievances about this publicly or in interviews. And they had just about enough of him talking about it, is what it seems like to me.
Yeah, honestly, the if it was ruled lethal injection after so long, like, because that's the thing, you see that in there if you don't have, because I always try to use Occam's razor whenever, um,
Simplest answer is the correct one, typically.
yeah. So like, let's say he doesn't like needles. There is no needles on the scene. There's no heroin cooked. You can snort it. You can snort heroin.
Yeah, yeah, but it's very, very difficult to produce a lethal dose of that.
That's what I'm saying. Like for him to like maybe if you parachute it or something, like eat it and then like
I don't
snort
know.
something, and then
I
like
don't even
as it
think
hits you,
then.
you stumble back.
I don't even think
Oh
then.
yeah, no, you're right. Because like it like almost needs to be like
Intravenous
intravenous to be the.
intravenous is like the most obvious, is obviously the far and away the most common way. Um, he had actually gotten into an accident too, I guess recently. So he was banged up and he had some scars that were perceived as track marks, but this story about the needles, about his being terrified of needles, it seemed way too credible. Um, like his dentist insisted his preacher or the reverend at the church he attended like terrified insisted that he was terrified of needles. I just think that they're Well, let's read a couple of the theories. Okay. Some claim that Liston was murdered. There are several theories as to why. Publicist Harold Conrad and others believe Liston had been deeply involved as a bill collector of the loan sharking ring in Las Vegas, where he tried to muscle in for a bigger share. Conrad thinks his employers got him very drunk, took him home, and stuck him with a needle. Theory two, professional gambler Lem Banker insists that Liston was murdered by drug dealers with whom he'd become involved. Banker said he was told by police that Liston had been seen at a house that would be the target of a drug raid. Banker said, Sheriff Lamb told me, tell your pal Sonny to stay away from the west side because we're going to bust the drug dealers. Banker later learned that the police told Liston the same thing to his face. Liston was allegedly present at dealer Earl Cage's residence during a raid by narcotics detectives. Because of that, Cage may have thought Sonny was an informant and shot him with a hot dose as retribution. Or option three, or theory three, the mob promised Liston some money to throw the second Ali fight, but they never paid him. As the years passed and Liston's financial situation worsened, he got angry and told the mob he would go to public with the story unless they gave him the money. That got him killed. And for me, that's the one.
Very
That's the one
likely.
for me. That one makes the
It's
most sense to me.
it's really not even far fetched because he's been tied with the mob his like almost entire life, at least
Sure.
his entire professional life.
Yeah. Sonny Liston retired from his career. I say retired, but unfortunately was forced into retirement by his untimely death. With a career record of 50-4, and he won his final bout against Chuck Wepner on June 29th, 1970, in Jersey City, New Jersey. An icon of American sports, an icon of the game of boxing. Um, he has been portrayed in film. He has been the subject of many documentaries. He'll always be tied with Muhammad Ali. Um, he's he's a his story is both tragic, triumphant, and everywhere in between. Errol, what are your final thoughts about Sonny Liston and his
Um,
life?
true. It's just a true test of what the human condition is like willing and can endure, and what can come from that. Like like what flowers can grow through the concrete if there are
Mm-hmm.
any.
Right. Yeah.
Um, couple things. Um, very sad because like we were saying, every corner it was just it was never it never seemed like it was there was a good thing for him to do or like a better option. But after he was interviewed, he was the heavyweight champion of the world, so he was granted a couple interviews, and in one of them he was asked, "What would you like to do after you retire?" And he said he said he wanted to work work at a boys club, like an at risk boys club. Um,
Wow.
he wanted to do like have like a boxing club.
So you want to give back?
Yeah, he was like, well, if I can do anything, it's just like I'll just hang out with kids who would be in like a situation like I would be in, and just like um, just kind of relax. He was also quoted to prefer he preferred being in the company of well, children, of course, like that's why he wanted to uh do the boys club,
Mhm.
and old people because he didn't he viewed them as non-threatening.
Yeah.
If he was able to be vulnerable with them and they could see him as not a monster and as just a person, then but if you talk to any like a girl or guy your age, you just see a hulking individual, and you're just like, but once he would portray to a younger old person that, hey, I'm not a threat, I'm just a friendly guy, they would get along. He would get along a lot better with that kind of crowd, just because he never had to prove anything to them.
Yeah, there's clear, very clear throughout, doing the research for his story. There's just a very clear underlying underpinning of goodness.
Everyone in his immediate circle, like because he was painted as just the bad guy, they
Yeah,
always said he was a soft-spoken nice person. And
yeah. I think that's it.
all,
Yeah, I think that's true.
me too, I'd like to that's why I'd like to think, you know, as bad as the hand he was dealt, he did all he could, and did what any other boxer did, and he took it on the chin.
Yeah, I don't want to exonerate him entirely from some of the decision making because at a certain point you got to be responsible for your actions, and it sounds like especially towards the end of his life, he doesn't sound like he had any interest in fathering his children, being a good husband and being there for his for his wife in any real way. It sounds like he treated her pretty poorly. So there are parts of his life, especially his personal life, that like I just can't endorse in any way or excuse. Um, for me personally, just on a moral level. But I do think that and it's not like his wife was quoted as saying that when he was there, he was good. He was a good person for them. But um, I just think that there was just so much for his mind to juggle on an emotional level, on a psychological level.
I don't.
I don't think good
I,
decisions were in his programming.
I feel like ever since he like it never really had like a lot of options, just like either A or B, they're just both bad. It's almost like if you spend your whole life like not able to like make like a reasonable choice, and like I was saying earlier, like have those first world problems, like you don't know how to have those first world problems, like
Yeah.
you just simply can't do it. He had no blueprint for how to be a decent dad. If anything, being the best dad according to like in his mind would probably be just literally not being there, just not hitting your kids, like you know what I mean. If you're not there, then you're not throwing them on the farm kind of thing. It's
It's true.
hard uh to to quote uh to quote Daniel B. Johnson, not to tell you guys how the sausage is made, but a little quote there, how are you supposed to, or how am I supposed to give love when I never got love?
Yeah.
And what
So
the hell
true.
am I punching for?
Right. 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 Yeah, the violence is an outlet for him. It always was. It was a powerful life. It was a great life. So that's the
Powerful life for
story
a
of Sonny
powerful
Liston.
man.
Very powerful man. In fact, ESPN.com list of hardest hitters in heavyweight history. He is ranked second,
Um,
only behind Mike
George
Tyson.
Foreman?
So
No, Ernie Shavers maybe.
one of the two. I don't see the list, but he's ranked second. So behind, Tyson's on there somewhere. George Foreman, he's in the mix. We'll say that. But
I've seen him confidently, or Sonny Liston confidently, like top four, top five, like best puncher or strongest punchers of all time. But the quote that I like to go by is George Foreman, who considered Sonny Liston like a father figure. Um,
yeah, he started training with him, right? I remember
yeah.
this.
hmm
Yeah,
Um, he
and what a career he had too.
oh that's this boxing thing might not even be biography, be boxography. That's what we might have
Boxography, I
to
love
do.
it.
And just work our way up to the modern times. But yeah, George Foreman, arguably too the strongest puncher of all time, was quoted as saying, "I would not want to fight him.
Wow, that's
He said,
amazing.
I
Yeah,
don't
I
want to
think I've
fight."
heard that. And they said in sparring, he was like the hardest. It was the hardest jab he had ever taken, I believe.
hmm
Closely
Oh yeah,
saying,
but yeah, sir. I think I said he wanted to run like a boys club. Yeah, he wanted to work in a youth center.
okay, gotcha.
Like, come on,
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, no. He's a like I said. There's goodness. There's goodness within
dude. So
the
if
story.
there's anything with even with all the bad choices, I've I've always thought a really good indicator of a person's like actual like like a moral compass is how you treat the disenfranchised,
Right. Yeah, your
old people,
interactions with right.
children. He would beat
Perfect.
the fuck out of regular people, like just
Police
regular dudes or
officers,
whatever.
authorities, right.
Exactly. People who he thought were just like trying to
Enfranchised.
exactly people who thought
Right.
they were trying to get pull a fast one on him, like whatever he
Yeah.
could and as much as he could. But like old women, children loved him just because he's like, he's like, we don't need to fight. And they're like, yeah, like that's, what do you mean? He's like, no, I'm just used to like just swinging, like, that's just, I'm always on, I'm a bad guy. And they're like, okay, like you don't seem like one. And he's like, okay, just, he's actually able to relax.
Yeah. Yeah, yep. It's an incredible story. We're gonna wrap it up here. This has been the story, the biography of Sonny Liston. This is
Um,
our number one biography in the biography series. So happy to start that series off with such a legend of the trade.
yeah,
Um,
quoted by his boxing historian Johnny Walker as one of, if not the most avoided fighters of all time.
Interesting. You know what? And that makes a perfect sense. I don't doubt that for even a second. And maybe we'll put that in the notes.
The,
Important
the
because that's
last thing
so
I the last thing
okay.
I will leave on is I truly don't believe that Rocky Marciano dodged him. I think Rocky Marciano really was cleaning up the end of his career at that time. And
Yeah.
while he probably would have got beat by Sonny Liston, there's no reason for him to fight. I
Yeah.
think Sonny Liston would have beat him 100%.
Could have been a passing of the torch, you know. That's just two ships in the night, really. You know.
Look what I mean. Sonny had to do it. Rocky's lucky.
Yeah, for sure. So that's it for Sonny Liston. Thank you guys for listening. What do we got next, Daryl? The next our next podcast, yes, that's our next peripheral views podcast episode. We are going to dive into the music series. We're
Yeah,
going to talk
Marty
about,
Robbins, right?
yeah, that's right. We're going to talk about the record, the iconic Western country record, Gunfighter Ballads and Trail Songs by Marty Robbins. We're going to dive into the production of that. Probably have a little couple samples or two of some of our favorite tracks. We'll dive into the lyrical content, the stories, all that.
You already
And
know it's
then
Big Iron.
Oh, well, you never know. We'll dive into that. We'll unpack that whole thing, front to back, each song, and then that should be we should be recording that within the next week or two, and so just keep an eye on our Twitter account. Happy Launch Day is coming on Memorial Day, so that will be next Monday. These will both be available to you guys when you guys are listening to these for the first time. It will be Memorial Day, Monday, May 29th. 2023. Uh, Next week we will be doing the Marty Robbins record. We'll do that. We'll do that episode, and the following week after that, or potentially even in the same week, we will be diving into another. We'll be adding to the biography series. We're going to talk Wendy Carlos. Wendy Carlos is an iconic figure in film. An amazing composer with an amazing story. We're going to tell that story the best we can, the best we're able to do it. So that'll be in a couple weeks. Look out for the next two episodes. They should be available in the next couple weeks. And we appreciate you guys listening. Thanks again for tuning in. This was a fun one to do. We were looking forward to getting it done. And thanks so much for listening.
Yeah,
Signing
appreciate you guys
off.
coming by.
We will see you guys in the next round of Peripheral Views. So look out.